Boys, it's been a hot minute. I do apologize for that. But yes, we do have a video. We are covering quite a lot of books, specifically Irish books. After my trip to Ireland, I got a lot of books. These are also some Irish books that I read before I went on the trip that I've just been collecting over the years. I thought I would showcase my collection, just go through these works, talk about what bits that I found interesting. So if you have an interest in Irish folklore, mythology, history, archaeology, that's really the majority of what I'm going to be talking about. So this video would be insanely long if I did a full-fledged review of each work, so we are not doing that. Instead, I am just going to be flipping through, talking about parts that I found interesting in the works, are they recommendations or not, and so on and so forth. So just the highlights, and now I'm going to briefly introduce each title. Our first is Old Ways, Old Secrets. This is about pagan Ireland, about myths, the landscape, traditions, and such. I won't go into a lot of detail about these, so I'll just kind of state them now. I really like Lady Gregory. She was my first introduction into Irish mythology with gods and fighting men. So I have a lot of respect and praise for her, but I was actually coming into something when writing, and there's this in the Tain, which is this cattle raid which involves Cuchulainne, who is the great hero of Ulster. There is a character that Cuchulainne fights called Calatin. Now, in Lady Gregory's work and some other works, Calatin is supposed to be this monster that is made out of him, his 27 sons, and I believe his grandson, and they're all one giant beast together, and they fight Cuchulainne, and they were only supposed to fight in single combat, but since Calatin is technically one being, it's not cheating. But I was getting kind of autistic and I was researching it, and apparently some Japanese manga thing has Calatin as well as some Fate Grand series or whatever, but it just didn't feel right. So I had another copy of the Toyn by Thomas Kinsella, who's translated by him, and in here, I think maybe this translation is more accurate, and then I kind of question some of Lady Gregory's other translations. I still think she's good, but he describes Calatin and his sons of being one of the same flesh because they are all related to Calatin. They're all his children, so they're literally like of his flesh. So Cuchulainne is fighting like 29 individual people, but they all fight together as one clan. I'm sure you really wanted to know that, and that was super interesting for you. If you're just starting out, Lady Gregory, she's great. I love her. But maybe a more accurate translation is from Thomas Kinsella. So maybe keep that in mind. I won't really go into these just because I don't know. It's good. Is it necessarily my favorite stuff from Irish mythology? No. I think I prefer the mythological and a lot of the Fenian stuff to with Cuchulainne, but there's still plenty of like great stuff there. It can be a little dry, of course, when they're just listing, and this is so and so, son of X, son of da, son of da, son of da. I don't really care, but it's detailed with that. You get a sense of kind of Ireland at the time, and yeah, there's still plenty to enjoy in these. I don't know what the fuck this is. I don't know what I have here. It's weird. It's kind of a waxy. It's very kind of smooth paper. It's like a little pamphlet, right? It has some illustrations. This is about the Hill of Tara. I think when I bought this, I didn't look at the page count, and I was expecting like an actual book. This is incredibly short, but it is by John P. O. Riordan, Professor of Archaeology, University College Dublin, third edition, published in 1960. This I don't really recommend. Because I think I spent like several more dollars than I should have for it, and I think it's just because it's a little more out of print. But we have some photographs of the Hill of Tara, the Mount of Hostages, all of that stuff, the Stone of Destiny, everything like that. So The photographs are nice. We have, some pages describing everything there, and it's not bad, but you can simply get a bigger, thicker book on the Hill of Tara that has a lot more information for probably the same price. So I don't really recommend this. And I think this is, it's not supposed to substitute an actual book. It's just like, oh, like trigger an interest in the Hill of Tara, and then you go see it, or like go check out longer, more detailed material. So I guess it's okay. But if this was like a $2-3, then yeah, sure. But I think it was more than that. So I don't really like it. I didn't really care for it knowing that. This is something I'm gonna complain about several times in this video, but I've kind of been getting more into the primary sources for Irish mythology, folklore, and stuff. But simply put, a lot of it has not been given, modern printings, modern publishings. But what do exist is quote unquote publishers, means like machine translated AI slop books on Amazon, and the formatting is fucking dog shit. And I got this book from Thomas Crofton Croker, Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, and it's definitely one of those where it's like a kind of shit formatting job, and I didn't really realize it until it was too late, and also there weren't really a lot of other options. Also, I believe he is the first person to publish a story about a Dullahan in Ireland. I think they definitely existed before he, wrote it down. Of course, I don't know how old they technically are, but I was doing research and it seems like he was the first. So I thought, well, I have to check it out. I have to look at the origins, and yeah, we'll get into it. I don't really love these. I think it's probably important, and definitely back then collecting these and writing them down was a big deal. But now when you have a lot of other works that are more modern and have taken like some of the stories that he has and they've published them better, and I don't know, I didn't love it. Maybe if I had read this earlier when I started getting into Irish folklore and such, I might have appreciated it more, but I didn't love it. The Book of Irish Curses. This is from Patrick C. Power. It's, yeah, lists some curses in like rural Ireland. It has notes and such, and some of it was kind of useful. I remember thinking this was just fine, not too bad. Ooh, this is big. I absolutely need more from this author, but we have here two works. We have Newgrange, which is obviously about Newgrange, 5,000-year-old passage tomb right at the River Boyne. It's the most impressive out of Knowth and Dowth there, and this is by Geraldine Stout and Matthew Stout, who are husband and wife. This was excellent, super informative. I loved going to Newgrange, and so I got a bunch of books about Newgrange and such, and I think they're great. And we also have here early medieval Ireland from 431 to 1169. This is by Matthew Stout, and this is perhaps my favorite book on kind of early Irish history. I think he's the best. This is the best so far that I've read, and I definitely want to read more by him. I was very, very impressed with it. He covers a lot of stuff. It's very detailed. He's got, some history texts can definitely run a little dry at times. I've definitely read some where it's like, holy shit, I hated that. But no, here, like, really interesting, compelling information for the most part. Really liked it. Unlike this piece of shit, Aedan of the Gaels, King of the Scots. This is by Keith Coleman. I did not finish this. I think I perhaps got maybe 100 pages or so. So basically, there was some Irish colonization into Scotland, and they called this kingdom Dalriada. I know I'm not pronouncing this stuff right, so whatever, sorry. And they had, spread into like the Isle of Man, Northumbria, Orkneys, Pickland, all that stuff. He was alive in the time of St. Columba, and this guy just on and on, just way, 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 way too much into the fucking nitty gritty about this hill tribe of the Highlands attacked in this year, and based on the thickness of the coins found in this bog, we can determine that. Shut up, all right? I guess I wanted more of an overview, a big picture, right, of this kingdom of Ireland that had expanded into Scotland. I'm like, ooh, that's interesting, but no, this wasn't very good, so I didn't finish it, right? An Irish Folklore Treasury. This is by John Creedon. So, quick thing about this guy, John Creedon. In Ireland, we did the Hill of Tara. We also did the Hill of Slane, and our tour guide mentions that, I didn't know this before, but there's a legend, St. Patrick, and I believe it was Samhain, so like Halloween, and the king is supposed to light the fire or whatever on the Hill of Tara, and St. Patrick allegedly on the Hill of Slane lit a fire first, and this was supposed to represent the fire of Christianity in Ireland. We'll get into that and some other St. Patrick legends, but this guy, John Creedon, if I have the right guy and it's correct, because I saw it on YouTube, and if I can find it, I'll play the clip. But he did an experiment where they had a bunch of people on Samhain, and they went to the Hill of Slane, and they started a huge bonfire, and they went to the Hill of Tara, and you could, even though they were very far away, or it's a good distance between the two hills, but it was absolutely possible to see a bonfire burning from the Hill of Slane, from the Hill of Tara. So that's cool. It probably didn't happen, and we'll get into that, but definitely interesting. But from what I understand about this book, it was in the 1930s in Ireland, and the Irish government wanted to collect folklore and write it down from the countryside, so they made school children go out and talk to older people in their communities and write down these tales. So this is a collection of some of those stories, and they've been bundled into a book. I really like the book. It's a nice hardcover, and I think it's great. Some of the stories are a little repetitive, go figure, but it's, they're stories written down by school children, so some of them are really cute and funny, and I'm really glad the Irish government did that. So, high recommendation from this. And here's the clip of them doing the bonfire on the Hill of Tara. So, interesting. I believe it's the same guy.
Between the trees. Look, look.
That's definitely it.
Jesus, that's as clear as day, isn't it?
Yeah, it's flickering. That's definitely a fire.
I tell you, Mickey, huh? I think we've done it, Kate.
Well done,
we've done it. Well done. I didn't do it to St. Patrick, did it?
The Way That I Went. This is by Robert Lloyd Prager. This guy is a geologist. He has an interest in botany. He has an interest in, I guess, zoology or animals. He is a very scientific-minded guy. Pretty sure I saw this in the Irish Museum, but there's this golden boat which they found in a bog, and there was this big court case. Sorry, this is around 1900 when this happened. And I'll cover it more when I get into the book, but this guy, the Irish had to argue whether this was found like a treasure hoard or if this gold piece was meant to be a offering to the gods, because if it was an offering to the gods, then the British government could claim it, but if it was meant to be a treasure hoard to be found later and recovered, then that meant the Irish got to keep it. Some weird thing like that. He was a part of that, and the Irish actually won that court case, and that was cool. He was the first man to enter the passage tombs, or there are a lot of passage tombs, but I think it was Carrow-Keele or Carrow-Moor. This is in the west of Ireland. They're very old passage tombs. I don't think they're as impressive as Newgrange, but still, it's a huge deal. He was a part of that. He explored a lot of caves. He discovered a lot. He had a really full life, but this is basically 5 years of his life traveling around Ireland and just writing about his experiences and the landscapes. it can be absolutely dull at times because he has a true passion for geology and just rocks and such, and he will go on long descriptions of those rocks, and that is not great for me. And my eyes glazed over at many points. There's some great stuff in here, some anecdotes that I did like it, would recommend it, but with a preface that, man, it can get really dry at times. But yeah, really sweet here. We have Newgrange. This is by Michael J. O'Kelly. O'Kelly was the man who really, there were others, but he did the bulk of the excavation. He was like in charge of the Newgrange excavation in I believe it was the 60s. Sorry, it has been like weeks and months since I've read some of these, so I'm kind of going to be flipping through them with all of you, and it'll be a little fresh, a little reminder for me. So we have like his notes from it, we have some great photographs and just going into the tomb and what they found there and everything. I really enjoyed this. We have Treasures of the Boyne Valley. This also includes Newgrange, Tara, and just a lot of interesting sites around the Boyne Valley, very important river in Ireland. We have some great photographs in here as well. There was the Book of Tara. This is from Michael Slavin, and this is just more detail about the Book of Tara. Really like that too. We had another Newgrange book, but this was a little one that I liked. Newgrange, Knowth, and Dowth. This is by Liam MacUstin. Exploring the majestic passage tombs of ancient Ireland. I like this. It's shorter. If you want something more detailed, then I would probably go with the Michael O'Kelly book on Newgrange. Or this book about Knowth, which has many authors, but honestly, really cool cover. It's green. It's got some black spirals on it. It feels good. It's an interesting book cover. We have photographs. Bunch of contributors. It's published by the Royal Irish Academy. I have a small bone to pick with them, but we'll cover that later. But this book I really enjoyed. It was very informative, and it's not super long either, so that one was also great. I think I will briefly touch on this. I might not, but Gerald of Wales, who came over with the Anglo-Normans after the conquest of Ireland. Not all of Ireland, but, they took a lot of cities and such. But he writes about some Irish mythology and just some of his notes. It's definitely worth reading if you're interested in Ireland, 100%. And then we have 4 books by Kevin Danaher, who I believe he was like a folklorist. He contributed to some magazines and such. He might have been a professor somewhere. I will, when I flip through these, I will probably discover that. But we have Gentle Places and Simple Things, Irish Customs and Beliefs. We have Folk Tales from the Irish Countryside. We have In Ireland Long Ago, the great classic of Irish folklore, and The Year in Ireland, Irish Calendar Custom. I liked all those. I think I liked some more than others, but I thought he was a pretty good author. I think he documented some interesting stuff. And then some text that I do not have in front of me. So, our tour guide also mentioned when we got to the Hill of Tara that at around the 1900s, for like 3 years, there was a group of British Israelites, meaning they're Anglo-Saxons that believe that they're the real Jews, right? And they also believe that the Ark of the Covenant was buried under the Hill of Tara, like at the Rath of Synods, I believe. So at the time, it wasn't a protected national monument. The Hill of Tara was privately owned, so they're able to convince the people that have it that they're going to dig there and they're going to find the Ark of the Covenant, and I don't know, something will happen. And I know what you're thinking. Man, the Ark of the Covenant is really cool in that British museum. I'm so glad the Anglo-Saxons found it. It was super based and awesome. Oh no. Oh no. Anglo bros, what happened? Where's the Ark of the Covenant? Oh man, are you kidding? You didn't find it? Anyways, 3 years, they don't find the Ark of the Covenant. They find basically fuck all, and they do a bunch of damage to some very old earthworks, and it's really shitty. There's really no punishment for them, and it was just these guys that thought they were the real Jews. It was Freemasons and all of that, but there's this book, Tara and the Ark of the Covenant. The book is extremely out of print. I couldn't find any copies at a reasonable price in the US, and there were some which were like 20 something bucks in the UK and Ireland, but the shipping would have been insane for just a single book. So I didn't ultimately get it. What I did do was I went to my library, who of course didn't have a copy, but there was a local university who did have a copy. So they did a intra-library loan, whatever. I got a copy of the book. I read it. Frankly, I'm glad I didn't spend like $50 to $60 to get my own physical copy, because I couldn't find any copies online at my usual pirate places like Anna's Archive, Internet Archive. They didn't have it. So I read through it. I took some notes on it. And it's just sort of, I think it's important that the author, documented all this stuff, but, it wasn't super exciting or really compelling. I guess I'm glad it exists. But the people who published this book in the early 2000s was the Royal Irish Academy. I sent them an email asking, is there any way to get an ebook of this? Do you guys have any plans to republish this at any point in the future? I didn't get a reply, so, a little, don't like you for that, but whatever. So there was that. There was an article we'll touch on at the very end. That was about some finds at Newgrange, which I thought was super interesting. And there was some small kind of tales. There was one about like two monks in Columba's time who... Oh no, this is about Aedan. Yeah, this is about Aedan and Dalriada, but yes, it is about two monks in Columbus time, which makes sense. And then the voyage of Snedgus and Mac Rialga, who are two clerics. They visit a few isles, and then nothing really happens. There's an interesting note at the end. And also, finally, for the online stuff, there was the voyage of the Cora. So, yeah, we will cover all those more towards the end. Oh boy, this is a lot. The plan was to not really do 5-hour videos anymore, and I think, this maybe isn't gonna happen like I thought, so, oh boy. Anyways, where to begin? I guess we will just start with old ways, old secrets, Pagan Ireland, and yeah, I'm just going to go over stuff I highlighted that I found interesting, and that's it. There's simply too many titles to do like a full read through on everything, so yeah, let's just go over what I took notes on. I almost forgot, there was in fact one more book. I literally threw this one in the trash. This was the Anthology of Irish Folktales, and it was god awful. Essentially, it was some really basic stories, and I already knew all of them at this point because I've read too much maybe, and I basically learned something new. There was one story in particular where overall, they all had a feminist, a more modern tint to all the tales, and that was annoying. But one of them was about a witch woman in Kilkenny. The author was basically just, frankly, a cunt. But in real life, it was this woman who got accused of being a witch in Kilkenny, and she ended up fleeing the country. And I think like a maid in her service was put to death or something. Now, the real story from what we know is she was married like 4 or 5 times, and all of her husbands died in rather quick succession. Now, again, people could die of, pretty fast of like a fever, a sudden illness, pneumonia, whatever, and it doesn't necessarily mean that something bad was occurring, that the wife was murdering them, which she was accused of, but that was odd. It definitely didn't help things that she had so many husbands die so fast, and it was certainly suspicious, right? If that happened today, right, you would definitely be suspicious of, or if a man had four of his wives die in very quick succession, no one would really feel bad or guilty about saying that, hey, maybe there's something going on there. But the author was like, and just because she was a woman, it's like, no, it's not because she was a woman. It's because four of her husbands, who are all wealthy, just happened to die super fucking fast, okay? There was also another one about this chain of truth. So there's supposed to be this chain, right, from heaven. And if you go and you touch it, then you can't like lie. Or if you're lying while holding it, you would burn, right, and just die immediately. And that's from like God. So we have this woman who is married to a good man. Unfortunately, they're not able to conceive and have a child for whatever reason. But the woman goes on and on about how much she loves her husband, how nice her husband is, and how he's so good to her. And, you know, her husband doesn't leave her, doesn't hit her, even though they can't have a child. And people in the village like mock them. And, you know, it's an unhappy situation. But the husband still loves his wife and everything. And there are some rumors going around that the wife is cheating on the husband, and the husband, he won't hear of it. No way, I love my wife. She would never do that to me, etc., etc. And turns out that the wife is actually cheating on the husband. Even though the husband is really good and loves her and does everything that a husband is supposed to do for a wife, he's a good man, but he's just being cheated on and humiliated. So they decide that they're going to go travel to this chain, and the wife is going to hold the chain and then say, you know, I've never cheated on you, husband. And then when she doesn't burst into flames, then the husband can finally believe her that telling the truth and she hasn't been unfaithful. But to travel there, they're going to have a guy bring a donkey with them, and the wife is going to ride the donkey. So they get to the chain, and the wife is holding the chain, and she says something along the lines of, I swear that I have never laid down with any man that I'm looking at, or whatever. But like, the donkey guy is positioned behind the husband, so she's not technically lying, right? Because she's looking at the husband and the donkey man who she's having the affair with. And the donkey guy is now a witness for the whole village. And, you know, the wife is still cheating on the husband when they get back. So she doesn't grow. She doesn't realize that I've been a horrible person for putting my husband through this. I'll never cheat again. Even though I think that's still shitty and you need to come clean, and the husband would probably leave at that point, which he should. But the author was like gleeful about this woman who tricked and cheated on her good, loving husband. And I just thought, how fucked is this? How absolutely fucked is this? You know, I don't think men would really love a story about guy has super faithful, loving wife that does everything for him, but he is constantly cheating behind his wife's back and humiliating her, and this is a like positive, happy story to tell. It was just from the mind of like this crazy like psycho feminist bitch. So do not read that one. She's just not a good writer overall. After I just ranted about that, you know, feminist book, I just realized that I just remembered that I really didn't care for old ways, old secrets, and we will get into it now because we're getting to it. So these people are basically, I guess, pagans and such, and they don't really care for Christianity. So I'll say this, right? I think the pagan stuff is interesting. I like Irish folklore and mythology. I think that's all good. I really enjoy it. And I think Ireland is perhaps a little more pagan than some of the other Christian European countries, and that's because they incorporated a lot of their paganism into Christianity. But, however, Ireland has been Christian. St. Patrick was what, like 432 or around there, something like that, right? And I think like a century after his life, Ireland was majority Christian, or it was definitely really widespread. Now, if they hadn't incorporated a lot of pagan beliefs into Christianity for the Irish, Would they necessarily have gone along with becoming Christians? Perhaps not. Reality of it is Ireland has been majority Christian for, I don't know, around 1500 years or so. Not a small amount of time. So I don't think you can really discuss Ireland or Irish folklore or mythology without talking about Christianity. And they are somewhat avoidant of the subject, and yeah, we will now get to that section. There is this Irish text. It's called the Book of Invasions, and it's a part of, I think, the Yellow Book of Lecan, or I might be wrong about that. Essentially, it's a history of the origins of the Irish race. How did we come to be in Ireland and such? And obviously, it was written after the Christians had come, but it's probably based on earlier oral tradition. But in the Book of Invasions, it goes, I think it's granddaughter of Noah is a part of a fleet of ships that come to Ireland. This is after the flood. They set up. Then another group comes. They're Partholon, and they're from Greece. The group after them is the Numidians. The group after them is the Fir Bolg. The group after them is the Tua de Danann. And the group after them is the Milesians. And these are the ancestors to the Irish. That's how it goes. But here on page 13, after the flood, they go, according to the Book of Invasions, Ireland's first inhabitants were led by Partholon, arriving from Greece about 300 years ago after the deluge. This is not true. The first one in the Book of Invasions is from Caesar, is from Cesar, whatever. I know I'm going to apologize a few more times, but I'm really not going to get these names right. Sorry. Now, it does appear that in some versions, Cesar is the first one to settle in Ireland, and in other manuscripts, it's Partholon. Oral tradition has been going on for centuries. Caesar obviously isn't mentioned as the first, but it just feels like, I don't know, a little petty. I know we're talking about old ways, old secrets, pagan Ireland, but I feel like you still kind of have to mention it. You could put like, hey, based on these sources, this one, and this one, this is why we don't have Cesar in this list, because we believe it was a later Christian addition. So I felt like they needed a little disclaimer or something there. Maybe people feel differently because it's a book about paganism, so of course, why are they not going to include it? But I feel like you have to discuss it. I don't know. They talk about druids, they talk about Danu, the Earth Mother, they talk about the Papes of Danu, which is apparently near Killarney, so I fucking missed it, which that's a shame because it just means the breasts of Danu, and we missed it. We're talking about like female power here, and this is on page 80. Alas, those original Irish laws and now history, male-dominated religious, political, and legal systems did their utmost to eliminate this abhorrent female power and stamp out the notion of women having equal status, substituting instead a culture where masculine rule was absolute and women were subservient, second-class creatures. Kind of annoying. What do you want me to say? Like, they're a warlike people. Women aren't good at war because they're physically not built for it. So a lot of the stories and legends and rulers are going to be about men. Go figure. She gets into the Tain a little bit, and she says it's refreshingly different to the English romantic legends of later centuries, where sad and soulful maidens wait hopefully in remote castles for a prince to come by, waiting to be rescued is not part of the Celtic woman's heritage. Go-getting is where it's at, whether by war or by seduction. So she's talking about Maeve here, and Maeve being a war queen or whatever, but this is also totally false. And look, this has always been a part of our tradition. This has always been a part of, Europeans, right? I mean, what's the Odyssey? Odysseus is on this voyage trying to get back home. Where's Penelope? She's at home, and she's not. Well, she is kind of sad and soulful. She's waiting for her husband to come back, but, she is like deceiving the suitors in the meantime, but she's definitely waiting for her husband. Saying that waiting to be rescued is not part of the Celtic woman's heritage. What about Sion, father of Lus? So there's Baelor, who is Wizard King of the Fomorians, and he literally has his daughter locked in a tower because of a prophecy that his grandson will kill him, so he doesn't allow any men near the tower. Sion literally comes by, scales the tower, impregnates her, leaves. What is that? Is she not kind of waiting to be rescued? What about Cuchulainne's wife, Emer? Cuchulainne goes, and he's like fighting in the Tain and against the armies of Knowth. What is she doing at home? Is she waiting? That doesn't mean I think Emer is like bad or whatever, but she's certainly not going out and like fighting and killing. So to claim that this is not a part of the Celtic legends is completely bullshit. It is absolutely a part of Celtic legends. Again, are there some warrior women in these stories? Yeah. They also kind of have sex with men, and are seduced. They're sort of a prize to be won, if you will. Queen Maeve at various times in the Tain offers the friendship, quote unquote, of her thighs on the Isle of Skye when Cuchulainne is being trained by this warrior woman. Her name starts with like S.C. Skablock or Skab. Irish is such a beautiful language. And then when he completes his training, she also offers him the friendship of her thighs. Yeah, even kind of your, badass female women, they get into some other stuff like the Banshee, some, basic stuff, the Death Coach, and that stuff's not necessarily bad, but it absolutely has a pagan and also a feminist, twinge to it, which is not quite correct. Something that's always kind of bothered me about Finn McCool, and I don't know if I'm barking up the wrong tree or not, but most of his legends are about him being with the Fianna. They're a band of warriors and hunters that travel around Ireland, and they do a bunch of cool shit. They're cool, right? I like them a lot. Finn McCool as a giant, and he's responsible for like fighting with a Scottish giant and creating the Giant's Causeway because of it. I feel like the stories of those stories are like this later kind of insert from English and Scottish sources, where I know in like English folklore giants are a thing, but in Irish it doesn't really seem to be a thing. I mean, Baelor is supposed to be like huge, but I don't know if he's necessarily a giant, and it seems like that's just this later kind of Scottish English insertion into Irish folklore. I might be barking up the wrong tree, and maybe the story of the Giant's Causeway is really old, but like him as a giant, it seems very recent. Like a few centuries, I mean. Oh, this was bullshit. Okay, so in the Fianna, Finn, when he's an old man, he wants to have a new wife. So he goes to I think it is the King of Tara, and he's like, hey, I want a new wife, can I marry your daughter? And like, yeah, cool, that's fine. But the daughter falls in love with a man under Finn's command. He is Darmund. Her name is Grain, and she ends up putting a gias, so Darmund is bound to do what she wants because it's honorable, or it's part of his honor, and if he doesn't do it, he's like shamed or whatever. So she says, you're gonna run away with me. They run away, and they're pursued across Ireland by Finn McCool and the Fianna. I won't get into all of it, but at the end of their journey, they've made peace, and it's years later, and they're at the mountain of Ben Bulben, which is like flat on top. It looks really cool. And they are on this boar hunt. Finn and Darmund are, and Darmund also has a gias where there's like a prophecy that he will be killed by a boar. So they're doing this. He knows there's a high risk of him dying, but he has to do it to help the Fianna because he's an honorable man. So they go on the boar hunt, and he kills the boar, but he's like stabbed in the side, and he's definitely going to die. Finn McCool has the power where if he cups water in his hands and people drink from it, they will be healed of all wounds, even fatal wounds, right? Darmund is like, Finn, you are my friend. Please give me some water. I'm dying. You can save me. And Finn, he goes, he gets water, he puts in his hands, and he gets close to Darmund, and this like jealousy and anger that he stole his woman flares up in him, and he can't do it. He lets the water trickle from his hands, and he does this again where, he's like, oh, wait, this is my friend. I can't do this. I can't let him die. So he goes to get water again, but as he gets close to him, once more, he lets the water run free from his hands. And Darman's upset. His son, Oisin, is very upset. His grandson, Oscar, is also there, and members of the Fianna are threatening to kill Finn because he's about to let Darman die. So he goes and gets water a third time, and this time it seems like he is going to do it, but by the time he gets to Darman's side, Darman has died. And this is kind of one of the fracturing points for the Fianna, right? Anyways, this is supposed to be a very tragic and sad end to the tale of Darmond and Grain, right? So Finn has a pretty cruel streak in him. Well, anyways, what our author writes here on 126. So they say Finn realizes what a fool he looks like, he relents, and the lovers are able to live happily ever after. Well, not quite. In that curious twist of fate so characteristic of Celtic legend, Darmond and Finn are out hunting together one day many years later, and Darmond is fatally injured by a wild boar. Finn tries to help him, but the younger male dies. The broken-hearted Gran accuses Finn of his murder and vows to bring up her children to scorn his name. Nevertheless, time goes on, and then she marries Finn. This is actually a part of the story. She does marry Finn. That is an interesting way of wrapping up this story. Finn tries to help him, but the younger man dies. Weird. You kind of missed the best part where Finn McCool 3 times has water in his hands, and 3 times he doesn't save his friend, and Darman dies. It's very tragic. It's very messed up. It's good. I really like it. It's one of my favorite stories from Irish mythology. But in our book about Pagan Ireland and old secrets, somehow that got left out. I think perhaps to make like old Pagan Ireland seem really romantic and kind and not a kind of brutal place with some good tragic stories, because that is absolute bullshit. And I don't know, there may be some version of this story where Finn is really nice and tries to help him, but I think the absolute majority of them are about Finn is fucked up and he lets his emotions rule him here and lets Darman die. Also, something that is kind of annoying from the author, and I felt like they should have mentioned this because this is a book about old ways, old secrets. We have the boar, and the boar stabs and kills Darman. 3 times Finn holds water that can heal him, and he doesn't save him. In the story of Lu's father, Sian, I forget, it's 3 brothers. I should know their names. But it's the sons of whoever. Lu's father and the sons, their families have been enemies for a very long time, and if they even see one another, they have to basically fight to the death. Well, Lu's father ends up running into them, and to try to escape, he turns himself into a pig, and he's trying to hide in a herd of pigs, but the sons saw a man disappear, so they know that one of the pigs is actually a person. They're able to find him and they kill him, and Lu finds out about it. He forces the brothers to make up for this blood debt to go around the world and bring him the greatest treasures of the earth. The brothers, they go and do this, and one of the items that they bring back is a magical pig skin that any water that is given to people from it will heal them of all their wounds. And by the time the brothers get back to Ireland, they're on death's door. They are dying, and Lu 3 times fills water up in the pigskin. He brings it over to the brothers to heal them. And 3 times, even though they did everything that he asked and they brought him all the treasures that he demanded, he lets them die. The author doesn't bother to draw a comparison here, right? Because we have the boar on Ben Bulben killing Darmond. We have Lu's father turning into a pig to try to escape, and then it's also a magical pig skin which is giving life, healing water. I feel like there's something there. There's some oral tradition connecting the two stories with the pigs and the water and such. They're very, very similar. Our author doesn't bother to make a comparison, but that's also like great. I do love that one as well. I learned a new word, which I did steal, imrama, which means rowing about, because we have some stories in Irish mythology. St. Brendan's Voyage, we have the Voyage of Bran, of Maldon, and she mentioned a few others that I wrote down so I could read them later because I had not heard of Uchora, Snegdus, and Magrialga. So I did check those out because of this book, so I guess I'm a little thankful for that. But I was going to have a chapter called Voyage of, but Imrama, that's a better word. Oh my god. She actually does talk about the story of Luh here, and it's the sons of Turin, that's it. But it's page 270, and Turin went with all speed to Tara, gave Luh the golden spit, and begged for the life of his sons. Luh sat silent for a while. They have accomplished wonderful deeds, he said, and it is not fitting that they should live on. Far better that they die a hero's death, and that the bards and storytellers of Aedan tell of their glories as long as this land endures. Turin bowed his white head and went sorrowfully back to impart to his sons what Luh had said. The sons kiss each other, they die, and then Turin also dies, and then, yeah. Kind of weird how he ripped out the tragic ending to that story. That's interesting. The author complains about Christians changing these stories, and then she goes ahead and alters the pagan versions of them. That's not the fucking story. Luh gets asked 3 times to save them, and he refuses 3 times. So there's definitely a tweaking and altering here, and that's not good. That's not correct. And we also had the story of Deirdre. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I'm probably wrong, but she is forced into a unhappy marriage with a king who murdered her lover, and then she's going to be given away to a new man who's also going to be an abusive husband. As she is being driven in a chariot to her new husband, she decides to jump from the chariot and bash her head against the rocks because that's preferable to her fate. And kind of weird, kind of interesting how the author tells this version of the story correct. You know, she doesn't soften the tragedy here. Why is this one told mostly right, and why are the others softened? I'm not sure. You know, I could maybe hazard a guess because, you know, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's because this one mostly involves a woman. It's about Deirdre, and so that one gets to be told true. I'm not sure. I don't know if I would read more by this author because, yeah, I agree, of course, in a lot of these stories, there's going to be like a Christian hand, you know, writing it down. So they probably, you know, altered things, but you're altering things also in a way that's definitely not quite true. And especially if you're like new to this stuff and you don't really have you know, you haven't done a lot of reading on the folklore and mythology and things, then you might go, oh, you know, this is how the story ends, when it's really not. Don't like it. Aedan of the Gaels and the little pamphlet of Tara, they're just, you know, they're not recommendations. There might be a better book on Dalriada, I'm not sure, but this definitely wasn't interesting. It's clear the author did a lot of research, and the book's not even terribly long, but each page was painful. It was really painful. Gerald of Wales, I've already talked about this text in other videos, so I'm not really going to get into it here. It is worth reading. It is short. But one of my favorite excerpts, which I'll just talk about now, is he talks about kingfisher birds. And if you take a dead kingfisher bird and you store them in a dry place, that they will change their feathers like once a year for forever, right? And I just thought that was really beautiful. That was really interesting. I've never seen that written anywhere else, so I don't know if this is some oral Irish tradition that he wrote down for the first time, if this is something that he brought over from continental Europe, or if this is something that he just made up himself. Very nice little excerpt. Oh, The Book of Irish Curses. Ooh, spooky. I didn't really like this one because it's mostly about Ireland in 1600s and so, and I'm more interested in like early medieval Ireland. That's the stuff I really like. So there's still some interesting stuff here. Cursing stones. You would collect a large number of smooth stones and heap them in the form of a peat fire, and then you kneel in front of the stones, and then you curse your victim. And then you would like hide the stones, and there's a curse on each stone. So there's something called the Glam Dican, and they are found in poetical tracts, and the term is ordinarily understood to mean satire or the like. It was used by the poets in ancient Ireland and is evidently a survival of pre-Christian custom. A reference in a 9th century Gaelic work under the heading Corg Unecht states, being on one foot and on one hand and one eye, making the Glam Dican. From this, it appears that while uttering the verse or verses, the poet stood on one foot, raised one hand, and closed one eye. This is kind of interesting. It reminds me of two things. So there's this creature in Scottish folklore. Maybe it's an Irish too. I think there's a connection, but it's a Facan, and it's a little creature. It has one leg, it has one eye, and it has one hand that comes out of its like hairy chest, right? So I think there's some common creature or something similar there, and it seems to be like rather old because this description here definitely reminds me of the little Facan thing. There's a mention of the Annals of the Four Masters here, and this talks about this battle in 1233. And this one man who had just lost a battle, apparently it was reported that the clergy of Knowth cursed them with bell, book, crozier, and extinguishing of candles, i.e. by the official curse of the church. According to the annals, this was the cause of the defeat of these men and their army at Moylurg in 1233. That's kind of interesting. I didn't realize the priests could kind of curse you, but maybe they can. All right. That was the Book of Irish Curses. There's some stuff in there that I found interesting that I hadn't seen before, so I'm it was useful for me for like research stuff to get it. So, yeah, I'm not too upset that I got this. We have Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, Thomas Croker, and apparently there was some controversy when this was made because he, maybe did not credit certain people for stories that they had collected and then he just put in his collection and such. Yeah, just going over the contents, it's kind of about priests, it's about changelings, banshees. We have the first mention of Dualhans that I can find, and if you've kind of already read a good amount of folklore and such, then nothing is really, special. Nothing really quite stands out. And yeah, just, I didn't love it, Oh, I did make a note of this in the story, The Little Shoe. It's about a chlorokin, which is sort of a leprechaun that makes shoes, right? And they're in a court case here. And they're at a trial here. The court, pray, what is a leprechaun? The law knows no such character or designation. Witness, my lord, it is a little consular man in the fairies or an attorney that robs them all, and he always carries a purse that is full of money. And if you see him and keep your eyes on him, then that you never turn them aside, he cannot get away, and if you catch him, he gives you the purse to let him go, and then you're as rich as a Jew. Banshee stories, those are, pretty common. They're fine. Oh, and then we come to the first story of Dualhans. This is The Good Woman. This is about a man riding on horseback, and he sees a woman traveling along, and she has this hood pulled up, and she doesn't answer him, but she gets on his horse, and they travel along for a while, and then she jumps off at a certain point, and she runs to this old ruined church, and this guy pursues her, and when he gets there, he is in this desolate churchyard, and oh no, there's a whole group of. Oh, and he's pursuing her because he wants a thank you kiss from her for, taking her along on her horse, which I felt was kind of odd. Like, for the time period that you could demand a kiss from a random woman like that, I felt like that would kind of go against, like, traditional Christian Ireland, but whatever. And oh no, he's about to kiss her, and then she's a woman without any lips to kiss. By reason of her not having a head. Murder, he cried. Well, that accounts for her not speaking. And he passes out, and when he wakes up, there is an old wheel of torture ornamented with heads like Cork Jail, and there are these other heads around. There are skeletons. They're dancing. Oh, and the Dualhans also amuse themselves by bowling their brainless noodles at one another. That's a direct quote from page 137, which seemed to enjoy the sport beyond measure. He did not know what to think, and sort of like Lovecraft, he just lost his mind. He couldn't handle it. Oh, but apparently the heads can speak, and they welcome him, they drink, and eventually he gets home and everything's fine. And he gets home to his wife, and his wife heard no more. A woman, I knew it was, cried she, but a woman without a head, Larry. Well, it is long before Nancy Gallagher ever thought it would come to that with her, that she would be left desolate and alone here by her baste of a husband. For a woman without a head, oh, father, father, and oh, mother, mother, it is well you are low today, that you don't see this affliction and disgrace to your daughter that you reared decent and tender. Oh, Larry, you villain, you'll be the death of your lawful wife going after such. Oh, oh, oh. Well, says Larry, putting his hands in his coat pockets, least said is soonest mended. Of the young woman I know no more than I do of Moll Flanders, but this I know, that a woman without a head may well be called a good woman, because she has no tongue. How this remark operated on the matrimonial dispute history does not inform us. It is, however, reported that the lady had the last word. Then we have a little poem about the death coach, Headless Horseman after that. And there's some little history at the end of some of these sections about like the origin of these stories. In Scotland, as recently as January 1826, that veritable paper, the Glasgow Chronicle, records, upon the occasion of some silk weavers being out of employment at Paisley, that visions have been seen of carts, caravans, and coaches going up Glenafur Braes without horses and horses without heads. A lot of the stories tend to involve a priest or poor people getting one over on their landlord, or that there's a good variety in there. It does cover some interesting stuff. I wouldn't recommend really getting a physical edition unless you can find a good publisher, because this one that I have seems to be a machine kind of put together, or a human did it and they did a not great job. But I probably wouldn't start there. If you're interested in Irish folklore mythology, there are other options that are better. The Tain and Lady Gregory, yeah, I would say you could start with Lady Gregory. Definitely Gods and Fighting Men. I think that's a good place to start. It really is. Maybe for more accurate translations, you might want something like Thomas Kinsella, and maybe there are other ones. Maybe he's not even the best, but there are differences in the versions. Not like gigantic, but there are enough differences there to make a note of. Now we're on to an Irish folklore treasury. This is by John Creedon. This was a part of an Irish folklore commission. This was set up in 1935 by the Irish government to study and collect information on the folklore and traditions of Ireland. This is about Finn McCool. He's going in search of a king's daughter to marry. He has to perform these 3 tasks to get this woman free from the devil. The next morning she came in and prepared their breakfast for them. She said that they had the 3 deeds done and that she would marry Finn next Monday. The man that Finn took with him was going, and he called Finn with them. He told Finn that he was the man that they were fighting about burying, and gave Finn a green branch. He told him to jag this in the lady's head every morning, and that it would knock a devil out of her. Finn thanked the man, and he could not be grateful enough to him, and the man went away. Finn did this every morning, and at the end of the week, the lady used and the lady used to go to hell. On the day before the wedding day, the lady broke her leg and she died in 2 hours. Oh, this is good. This is on page 48, Two Strong Men. This is about a girl getting a story from her parents. Oh, she starts her story by introducing her father, who is aged about 52 or 3 years. Cuchulainne and Ferdiad were two strong men that lived in Ireland long ago. These two men were married. They were living a short distance away from each other. Ferdiad's wife did not like Cuchulainne at all. She had some grudge or other against him. She was continually asking her husband to give him a sound thrashing, but Ferdiad was afraid of Cuchulainne. At length and at last, he took courage and set out for his neighbor's house. Cuchulainne's wife saw Ferdiad coming. She knew well that this man was able to beat her husband, and he knew it too. Here is Ferdiad coming. I wonder what he's looking for. I suppose he's looking for a fight. That wife of his is a holy fright, said Cuchulainne's wife. Cuchulainne looked at the door and at the window and saw that there were no means of escape. Here, jump into the cradle and I'll put clothes about you, said his wife. In he got and made himself comfortable. Now Cuchulainne's wife had a good deal more sense than Cuchulainne, and he knew that. Ferdiad comes in looking for him. They put rocks in food for Ferdiad, and they give Finn some food without rocks, and then Ferdiad breaks his teeth, and he's like, wow, that baby's really strong. I guess Finn is so much better than his baby, and there are a few other things. He runs away thinking that, wow, if the kid is this bad, then the father's going to be so much worse. What they did here is they confused the story of the making of the Giant's Causeway with Cuchulainne and Ferdiad instead of the real story, which is about Finn McCool and a Scottish giant. So that was definitely interesting. That was funny. The Dead Coach. This is the story of the Dead Coach. One Saturday night a long time ago, a woman was sitting at the fire alone, making a dress for herself. It had just struck 12 o'clock when the woman heard a rumbling noise coming up from the road. She knew at the minute that it was the Dead Coach. She was so frightened that she put out the lamp and she left the sewing on the table and ran into bed. She woke her husband, and he was so vexed with her that he ran out to the door and shouted after the Dead Coach to take his wife off with them. The woman was so frightened that she got sick and died a week later. They talk about ghost stories, about crops, about food being prepared back in the day. Of course, it's not like medieval times, but more of 1900s times, like collecting seaweed, using mills, thatching, stuff like that, forges, making of bricks, making of baskets and barrels, about food they used to eat as well. They also talk about hedge schools when it wasn't legal for, I think, Catholics and I think it was just Catholics in general. I don't know if it necessarily applied to just Irish. I think if you were Protestant and Irish, you could, but if you were Catholic, I don't think you could attend higher education or any education. So they would form illegal schools called hedge schools, and you would have wandering teachers going around the countryside and teaching children. So they have a section about those, talking about what it was like, because these people who in 1935, some of them like experienced the tail end of that, or they heard stories secondhand from that. A little section about games that children used to play, and then on 179, people's hands were harder than they are now. This is about long ago, there was a game played at wakes called slapping. A man would get up and put his hand behind his back with his palm outwards. Then he would challenge any man in the house for slapping. Then the man would get up and give him 3 slaps on the hand as hard as he could draw them. Then they would change places and keep on like that every second time until one could give in. Sometimes before they would give in, the blood would be streaming out from the tips of the fingers. That time, people's hands were harder than they are now. Section on curses, a section on weather, religion, times of hardship and dealing with bad landlords, and stuff like that. Also, celebrations and what they would do on holidays. So I had a few things underlined here, just ones that stood out as particularly funny, but I think this is great. I do think, some of the stories could be a little repetitive here and there, but it's definitely cute. I'm really glad that the Irish government decided to do this. About 100 years ago, we're just shy. We're 90 years ago. Yeah, I guess it'd be the 90-year anniversary this year. But a lot of great stuff in there. I think that's a high recommendation for someone that just wants like a nice, easy read, and yeah, definitely amusing. We'll go into Kevin Danaher in his books next. His four titles that I checked out: Gentle Places and Simple Things, Irish Customs and Beliefs. I didn't have a ton of notes here. He talks about various things like castles, about some stories about dueling, some about hungry grass, standing stones, stones that would speak and give prophecy and such, about fairy people, water monsters, stories of witches turning into rabbits and stealing milk from their neighbors, about ghosts, sunken cities. He refers to a creature called the Dalachan, so he doesn't pronounce it Doulahan, it's Dalachan, which I thought was interesting, but it's the same thing. Apparently, people made floor mats out of otter skins. I don't know if I like that. I don't know. I feel like that kind of smell, right? That's probably not great. There's a woman, Biddy Early. Her name has come up a lot when you research Irish folklore. She was apparently a wise woman that would make healing charms and mixtures and such. So she was really high respected and regarded, and she had a charm to prevent butter stealing. If you took the dried hand of a murderer who had been hanged in public with this gruesome relic, you would stir the cream in the churn from which the butter was being taken, and you would know at once from the enormous return from the churning how much butter had been spirited away from your dairy. Oh, this was kind of cool. There were two brothers and a sister living on a farm, and the farm next to theirs was owned by a young boy, a nephew of their own. So they want to get that nephew's farm and add it to their property. So the men go to this witch, and she says, Go you to the place of skulls and take one skull from it, and scrape the moss from it into a saucepan of milk while you're saying the name of the one that should die. And give him the milk to drink, and before a month is out, you'll see what you'll see. And God save us all from the like. Didn't they do it with the skull they took from the window of the old church? But it was back on themselves it came, for the three of them were dead from one thing or another before the year was out, and the boy they wanted to kill got their farm as well as his own. There was always danger, it seems, that the spell might recoil on those who worked it, so that between one thing and another, only a very depraved person would dabble in these horrible rites. So he talks about curses a little bit, ghosts as well. He also talks about, the Voyage Tale, St. Brendan, and Voyage of Bran, Muldoon, all that. I actually have, I was able to get a physical copy of Muldoon and Brendan, and I have all those. I think those are all good. Like, I like all of them. Kind of just piecing through them all. Some of them are obviously inspired by each other, or they, kind of, took some from the rest. I think this one is okay. I think perhaps it was my least favorite of the works of Kevin Danaher. So I don't know. Sorry, I thought I had more notes for that one, but I guess I really didn't. And then this one, he has stories from a few different people that he collected from them and he just compiled into a book. Yeah, I'll see if I have anything here. Going over the introduction and contents page, it seems pretty standard. Like, if you've checked out some Irish folklore stuff, you probably know them. Turns out I don't have any notes for this one. I'm kind of shocked. I guess, it has been probably close to 6-ish months since I've read this, maybe a little longer for this one. Sorry about that. I didn't make any notes, but that doesn't necessarily mean I didn't enjoy it. I feel like if I had disliked the book, then I definitely would have made some notes in the margin about certain stories, but I flipped through it again. It seems fine, not necessarily whoa, amazing, but I think it was fine. I'm sorry, I know that's not helpful. I should have probably made a smaller video months ago when I read kind of the first chunk of these books, and then made a video now when I finished kind of my second big chunk of them. So sorry about that. Ireland long ago, this is about, the country people, about their houses, making them with thatch, whitewashing them, the hearth, pots and pans, what they ate, would they drink, what did they wear, things of that nature. Yeah, it covers a lot. I remember enjoying it, and this is something interesting that I noted. So, an early cooking method would be you would take game birds, you would cover them, feathers and all, in a couple of inches of yellow or blue clay. You put them in a hot fire. When time had elapsed, the lump, now hard as stone, was drawn out and broken open. Off came the crust of clay, and with it the feathers and skin, and the meat inside was perfectly cooked without the loss of a single drop of juice. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Don't know how common that would have been. Right? Well, I don't know. It seems common enough. It seems rather efficient. He mentions here on 67, during the last 60 or 70 years, there has been a movement in most of the countries of Europe to keep in use as a dress for festive occasions the old local or provincial costumes of both men and women. People talk of folk dress and national costume and are very eager to learn about them and wear them. When such a wealth of interesting and beautiful forms of dress were in Ireland in the past, it seems a very great pity that the form of dress believed by many to be Irish was invented about 60 years ago, in the early days of the Gaelic revival, and is quite bogus. The so-called Irish kilt is merely a copy of the Scottish kilt, taken over in the belief that both Irish and Scots worn it as some former time. In actual fact, the kilt was never an Irish dress. I think I saw that in one of the museums over there, and I thought that's not correct, but whatever. And he ends with a section on wakes and funerals, and that was all fine. This book, of course, has to deal with Irish holidays. He begins with St. Brigid's Day and making a St. Brigid's cross. Also, just some of the food and little rituals they would do, like leaving stuff out for St. Brigid, leaving out cloth for her to bless, and then in the morning you would wear it and offer some kind of protection. And apparently there would be some little ceremonies where you would have a girl in the family representing Saint Brigid, and she would exit the house and then knock on the door to come back in, and then she sort of ritualistically blesses the family. Oh, there was this brutal anti-incel holiday, I'm not making this up, called Chalk Sunday. This is for those who did not marry at this time. So people would be marked with chalk on their way to or from church on the first Sunday in Lent. This was Chalk Sunday, when those who remained unmarried at Shrove had their clothes decorated with stripes and squiggles of chalk. Small boys rushed from doorways and made their mark. Young men and girls whipped out concealed bits of whiter colored chalk and did the same. For the most part, the victims took the chalking cheerfully, if somewhat sheepishly. They would also play practical jokes on hardened bachelors. A frequent joke was the drawing on the whitewashed house wall of a grotesque caricature of the owner, while in places in County Donegal, a wife, quote-unquote, in the form of a scarecrow-like effigy was provided for the bachelor and set up opposite his house for all to see. In Hall's Ireland, 1842, we read that in Waterford City, an unruly crowd of the lower classes, quote-unquote, dragged a large log through the streets with ropes, preceded by a musician, and compelled unmarried men and women to sit on the log, sometimes even tying them to it. This was done on Ash Wednesday. Irish people are fucking brutal. If I remember right, it's been several months, but there's an even better example of the Irish later on. We'll get to it. Oh, okay. I found it. So there was this custom called May balls, and it's the gift of giving decorated balls on May Day. Thomas Croker, the guy who wrote the not ideal traditions of Southern Ireland, makes it clear that these were decorated hurling balls, for in his description of May Day revels in Cork, quoted above, he says 2 of them bear each a holly bush on which are hung several new hurling balls, the May Day present of the girls to the youths in the village. This is confirmed by Amalab O'Sullivan. Brides would also, if they had been married since May Day, they're compelled to furnish the young people with a ball covered with gold lace and another covered with silver lace, finally adorned with silver tassels. The price of these sometimes amounts to 2 guineas. These balls, the symbols of the sun and moon, are suspended in a hoop ornamented with flowers, which hoop represents the circular path of Belus, or the sun, and in this manner they walk in procession from house to house. This is it, I found it. The newspapers of the period have much to say of these disturbances. For instance, an indigent letter in Finn's Leinster Journal on 4th of May 1768 says, to the printer of the Leinster Journal, Sir, though the following piece of advice may appear something like after death the doctor, it may, however, like a remedy taken for the ague when the fit is over, contribute in some measure to prevent the next periodical fit of the mob of this town. For many years past, the peace of this city has been disturbed every May Eve by a vast multitude of audacious fellows who assemble together to collect May balls among the new married folks. They sally out with Herculean clubs in their hands, and as those unmeaning May balls are seldom or never given without a piece of drink money to boot, such bloody battles ensue in different quarters of the town, such confusion and uproar as would induce a passing stranger to believe that a furious band of wild Indians had broken in upon us, that magistracy was asleep, or that it had lost all power and influence over the subject. The mischief that follows from this barbarous and unheeded custom is more feelingly understood than can be expressed, not to mention the fractures, contusions, etc., which are well known to happen on such occasions, and by which many of those miscreants are disabled for a considerable time from working for themselves and for the support of those who entirely depend upon their sound legs and arms. Many gentlemen's gardens are wantonly robbed of all their beauties, the cultivation of which costs the owner a vast deal of trouble and expense. The hedges and fences in the outlets of our city are stripped of full-grown hawthorns, whose late blooming pride and fragrancy is now miserably dying away on dunghills before cabin doors, by way of linnet and his mate, but fastened in the ground for the vilest purposes, to hang filthy clouts upon. And shall magistracy stand by, looking on such mischievous abuses like an unconcerned spectator? No, that same justice and humanity which has already redressed so many grievances in the city will certainly prescribe the following remedy, to be used before the mob's fit returns again. Recipe: 24 drams or hours imprisonment, as many blisters as can be placed upon the scrapulars, their names recorded with infamy on the grand jury's list, for all those club bearers and for all those hedge robbers, if any of them can be discovered and can be convicted at our next quarter sessions. If not, let such public and previous warnings be given for the time to come by the inferior officers of the city, as may deter those wicked bullies and those wild boars who have trampled upon and ravished all the sweets of our little Aedans, as well as all givers of Mayballs from ever doing the like again. I am, sir, not a sufferer, but a hearty well-wisher of the city of Kilkenny, and your constant reader, Floris. And the author goes on, apparently some people would die during these events. They would fight over the riches that, would be given to them. He also gets into how when it was May, like the first day of May, farmers would be very protective of their water. There was a lot of superstition around this. Like a farmer and his son would sit out and protect their water with shotguns and not give any of their water away, because lowered the quality of their water for the remainder of the year and such, so they were very suspicious. And any strangers seen upon one's property on May morning was immediately suspect of evil intent and might be lucky to get away with only verbal abuse. He has an example here. A young student was nearly killed one time by the people, for they saw him walking up and down on May morning on the grass while he read aloud from a book in some strange language, and they concluded that he was trying to bewitch the herbs of grace, which are for healing. Fortunately, however, a priest came by, and having examined the book, found it to be a copy of Virgil. So he informed the excited crowd that the young man was simply going through his college duties in the grand old language that St. Patrick had brought to Ireland, and which was sacred forever to the use of the church. On this, they were pacified, and the young student was allowed to depart in safety. And I'm not sure. I think, yeah, the Irish, kind of more rural people, definitely would have truly believed in these superstitions, because he brings up some stories of changelings and of mothers killing their children. Was it necessarily because they truly believed that their child had been replaced by a changeling? Possibly. It could also be that their child is kind of weak or deformed in some way, and they would like that baby to go away. And yeah, there are some incidents like that he goes over some of the practices on Halloween. He goes over Christmas and yeah, a bunch of other little holidays. I thought this one was pretty solid. I liked it more than some of the others, and yeah, there's some useful information in there for me. But if you want some insight into Irish holidays, how they, well, no, it's still a long time ago, but I guess late-ish 1800s, kind of around there, or earlier, like mid 1800s to like early 1900s, kind of. Yeah, we have quite a few books about passage tombs, about the Hill Tara, about Newgrange, the area around the River Boyne. So we're now going to dive into that. We're going to start with Newgrange, Knowth and Dowth, exploring the majestic passage tombs of ancient Ireland. This is by Liam Mac Uston. This is pretty short. It's just a little bit over 100 pages. He goes into the history of who built Newgrange, Neolithic people, the artwork there, the rediscovery, the reconstruction. He also touches on other Boyne Valley sites there, like the Hill Tara, a few abbeys nearby, other passage tombs, what Newgrange means in Irish lore, and what Newgrange is today. Oh, there's also a good amount of photographs of the inside of Newgrange, and also some illustrations showing, like the Neolithic people building it and such, and those are all good. Everything looks high quality. I like that a lot. Oh, he makes a note here that the Vikings apparently sailed their boats up the River Boyne and ransacked the quote-unquote Cave of Knowth several times in the 9th and 10th centuries, but we will get into that. I'm pretty sure Matthew Stout goes into this in greater detail and says that it's kind of unlikely that, at least for Newgrange, that they would have raided inside Newgrange, because the tomb would have been basically covered up at, not basically, the tomb would have been covered up at this point. Knowth was occupied, like the top of the mound had been turned into a little kind of fortified place for the kings of this, I believe, rather small kingdom. I think it was Brega. So they made this like their capital, but were they necessarily inside the tomb? Maybe not, but did the Vikings break into Knowth? Possibly. But Newgrange is more unlikely. I'm pretty sure, yeah, Matthew Stout gets in. And it's really interesting that even though by the time the Irish people get to Ireland and, Newgrange is already several thousand years old, there are still these great stories and mythology, because it's supposed to be the palace of the Dagda, or is it Oingus? Or I think Oingus is one of the Dagda's sons, and he takes the palace from his father. But there's all of this stuff, or you know what I mean? Like that's cool, right? And then they the Pullman dolmens, the little wedge tombs all around Ireland. They just fit their own mythology into it. So the tri-spiral, I mean, that's pretty well thought of as like an Irish symbol or a Celtic symbol, but I guess in reality it's a Neolithic symbol. So that's kind of interesting. I guess Celtic people coming into Europe, they would come across these like really old ruins and they just liked the artwork and they incorporated it into their cultures, I suppose. Could also be that they had a similar design as well, so, just kind of clicked or whatever. It's not a super deep text. Again, it's only 100 pages, but I think it does do a good job. If you just want something quick read, gets you the basic facts, it'll definitely pique your curiosity if you want to read more about it. So, yeah. I think that's solid. I don't think it was too terribly expensive anyways. But now we will get into Knowth. Knowth book, again, I think this has the best presentation of basically all the titles that I have here, but you have a ton of photography of before the excavation, during the excavation. They have a little map here listing all the passage tombs nearby on the River Boyne. It's great. It's really fantastic. I think this one was relatively cheap, less than $20. A lot of colored photographs too. They go into the Neolithic people living at Knowth. That would have been about 3700, 3600 BC. When were they built? They also... okay. It's in the west, and they have Carrowmore and Carrowkeel, which are close by, but they're definitely separate. It seems like there's very, very few passage tombs in the southwest of Ireland. There's a couple, but the vast majority are around the River Boyne, and also Carrowmore, Carrowkeel more in the northwest, and also in just Ulster there's a bunch too. But a pretty big chunk on the west coast, there's absolutely nothing. That's interesting. And like Newgrange, and I don't know if it's necessarily every passage tomb, but it ends in a cruciform. So there's a little passage that goes into the tomb, and then it ends in a small chamber that has 3 sides to it. Knowth is the same as Newgrange, and I think most of them are built like this, but yeah, not all of them. And unlike Newgrange, this is still occupied by people. So in the 8th century, they know for sure that they had access to the internal passages of the chambers because there were forms of writing on some of the stones, and this is represented by the Ogham language, Oghim, which is a form of writing the Irish made. It's like, here's a line, and then you make dashes on the line, some above, some below, and these make words. And it's still occupied for a really long time, and we know for sure that the Vikings raided it as well. I mean, you can trust that in the annals because there's a lot more evidence that backs that up compared to like raiding Newgrange, when Newgrange seems like it was sealed until it was rediscovered in, I think, the 1700s. But it gets into the excavation, and yeah, there's just a lot of, it's deeper than just surface level stuff. It's not as deep as like some other texts, but I think that one was great. I think that's definitely a really worthy consideration if you want something on Knowth to start out with, right? And then go with something else, but solid. Now we're with Michael J. O'Kelly, his Newgrange book and his findings. And this isn't just like his writings, it's contributions also by Claire O'Kelly and by others. And this is mainly just being introduced to Newgrange. It's about the excavation of the tomb and the artwork that they found there. I'm pretty sure he died before the excavation was fully completed, but the majority of it was completed by the time of his death. 1699. That's when it was rediscovered. That's it. Okay. He quotes here in the Annals of Ulster under 862 and the other in the Annals of the Four Masters under 861. To quote from the former, which is the earlier of the two annals and is a very reliable compendium of early material, the cave of Achdad Aldi and the cave of Snodba and of Fert Bodan over Duabd were searched by the foreigners. Dowth and Knowth are readily identifiable in the annals since the Irish names used are very close to the present anglicized forms, but the other cave which was searched, that of Aldi, cannot be reconciled with Newgrange, which was originally known variously in the early Irish literature as Brug Angusa, or the Palace of Angus, and so on. All names designating in the Brugh or mansion of Angusa, the Dagda, the chief god of the pre-Celtic pantheon. So he believes because of this that it's doubtful that Newgrange was raided by the Vikings, but that Dowth and Knowth were raided by them. And also that the entrance to Newgrange was probably unknown at this point and been buried for a few thousand years. So the Vikings, looking to just raid something fast and be on their way, would have gone for Knowth and Dowth and not really messed around with Newgrange trying to dig into it, which would have cost them a lot of time. Walking inside, it was definitely really special. It can be a little tight, a little narrow, but it's really cool. You get to the chamber, and then you have they called a corbelled roof, which meant the Neolithic people, they would stack dry stones on top of each other, and as they did it, they would make them a little more narrow with each level, and then you put a capstone on top, and they had their own version of, I think it was, they burnt fiber or such, and this was put in between the rocks, so the chamber was watertight. No water really got in until, the chamber collapsed and there was water in there, but if it had been maintained, then there wouldn't have been any water. But yeah, the roof was definitely really impressive. There were 3 basin stones, one in each of the little recesses, and then one of them had been shattered. This was because people were looking for gold and they thought it must be under the basin stones, so they moved one or just smashed it open, and that one was cracked, but the others were still there. And there was a good amount of artwork when you got inside. It was like spirals. You had some just kind of squiggly lines. I don't know if I'm too big into it. I think it's cool, right? I like it, but I'm not like, whoa, Neolithic artwork. But it's still like cool and impressive with that. Oh, there was also graffiti in there as well from like the 1800s, where you would have people come in and they would carve their names in some of the stones that had been there for thousands of years. So that was not great. It was like John something, and he brought like his girlfriend to the tomb and they wrote their names there. I remember those, and I think there were a few others. Oh, and there were some authors, so at kind of a good distance away from the mound, there are some large rocks that form a perimeter around Newgrange, right? Some writers believed that the mound must have used to like extend all the way to these rocks, which would have been gigantic, and O'Kelly goes into detail about how he thinks that's not true, and the mound is basically where it stands now, the reconstruction of it, what would the original have been like, and those boulders out there are just kind of a boundary, like a spiritual boundary kind of a deal, and it definitely wasn't that large like some people suggested. Some people also believed it was built like a pyramid, and it definitely wasn't built like that either. He talks about the Annals of the Four Masters here on page 44, the last of the Irish Annals, chronological records of Irish history from earliest times, was compiled between 1632 and 1636 by some of these survivors. The Four Masters, as they are commonly known, in a convent of the Franciscans in Donegal, grateful no doubt for the daily allowance of food which made their work possible, and conscious, as one of them put it, of the cloud which at present hangs over our ancient Milesian race, these men collected the past history of Ireland from the old manuscripts available to them so that posterity might be informed how their forefathers employed their time, how they continued in power, and how they finished their days. That's something that I really wished existed. The Annals of Innisfallen, the Annals of Ulster, the Annals of the Four Masters. There are physical copies, like good ones, but they were made in like the 1800s or early 1900s, so they're super fucking expensive and they have never been reprinted. White Pill ain't got that cheddar to blow on those old books, but they sound like really cool. Like, I'd like to own them. I wish someone would just republish them and not like machine translated blah, but do like a good job with them, because they're really cool. They're interesting, but there are electronic copies, but those are simply not the same. So yeah, I don't know. I just prefer to have a book in my hand. I like being able to write in the margins and to highlight and underline stuff. I enjoy it a lot more. Just seeing these old photographs from before they began the excavation, and you have all these trees growing out of Newgrange. There's that one photo of the cow on top of Newgrange. It's incredible. It's incredible the work that they put in, what they were able to accomplish. It's really great. Yeah, they call it the Great Circle, and Newgrange, yeah, he says it definitely wasn't as large as that. Some of this book can certainly be a bit dry. I mean, that's kind of a running theme for this video, but they go into the methods and how they began the excavation process and dividing it up into grids. And oh yeah, okay. This was a big controversy. There's the Carn slip. So the top of the mound, over thousands of years, the earth slipped down, it shifted, and it ended up covering the tomb. And at the base of the mound, there are these decorated curbstones that go around the whole thing. Well, there was a lot of controversy because people agree that there was some kind of retaining wall above the curbstones, in between like the curbstones and the mound, and these were made, and this wall was made out of like granite rocks and other rocks, so that's why Newgrange looks really white from a distance. It's because of those rocks. O'Kelly says that this is how tall the retaining wall would have been, and that's how they reconstructed it. Some people think that, okay, there was a retaining wall, it definitely wouldn't have been that tall, but he gives some decent evidence. I really don't know, but like before they moved anything back, they took photos of everything, measured it. They brought out some, I think it was a reconstructionist, architect or whatever. So here's all this material. What would it look like if you put it all back together? And that's what they came up with, and that's what they went with. So it looks good. Maybe it's not exact. I don't know. I think this guy knows his stuff. I think he did a great job. But even if it's not exact, the point is to make Newgrange something that people can visit, that they can go inside and explore and pique their interest, which happened with me. So, yeah, I don't know. It's fine. The grave goods that they found inside, there were some marbles, pendants, 2 beads, some flint flakes, a bone chisel, fragments of several bone pins and points. And of course, there were a lot of cremated remains in there, but also some uncremated remains as well. They also found some golden Roman goods like coins and brooches and such that were left around the tomb. So they believe that there were some visiting Romans that came by and to like pay respects to the god who lived at Newgrange. They left them there. Could have also just been some Irish who traded with the Romans and they brought these goods back and then, left them here as tribute. Either way. But yeah, it was still like thousands of years after the tomb had been closed up, it was still like highly regarded and respected. It's also kind of interesting because there is the roof box. There was some controversy over that, but I do believe the roof box is genuine because it does line up with the solstice. So on the winter solstice, for a brief amount of time, and if the weather is good, sunlight will fill the chamber through this roof box at the mouth of the chamber. It'll go all the way back in and fill it with light. They had a simulation when we were there, and they turned the lights off, and then they simulated the sun, and it was cool. It was very cool because that's the shortest day of the year, but it's like, oh, the sun, it's coming back, every day from now on will be longer than this date forward. So that's interesting. What's also kind of interesting is I don't know this legend super well, but it's the son of the Dagda, Angus, and he tricks his father out of getting Newgrange as his own palace. And in Irish mythology, it's kind of interesting. I feel like there has to be a connection. Was oral tradition that strong that it carried down this long? But I believe he conceives his son Angus he sleeps with another man's wife. It's some goddess, and her husband is away at the time. There's going to be an issue because her husband will see that she's pregnant, and then, hey, that's not my baby. So they do something they make the sun stand still for 9 months in the sky, and then, Angus is born in a day. But there's some solar deity myth stuff going on, and, there's a connection with Newgrange being a mound, and there's a tunnel to it, right? And then what happens? The chamber is filled with light. It's filled with the sun. The symbolism is not lost on Whitebill Media. So I don't know. That has to be some very strong oral tradition for that to be carried down to the Irish and to have that kind of connection there, because they definitely weren't inside the tomb at that point. He has a long gallery detailing all of the artwork that they found on the curbstones, and then, the artwork found on the interior stones as well. He also has a really detailed list of all of the goods that they found there. I kind of glazed over this stuff because he goes, well, I mean, what do you expect? But super detailed about all the bones that they found, about the teeth that they found, the sizes of the teeth, and all of that. Oh, okay. He talks about finding the remains of some dogs in the tomb, which I will get to. There's a super interesting article about that, but he believes that they found dog remains there. But oh boy, I know you're really waiting for it, but oh boy. He says the bodies of 3 dogs may have been brought into the tomb. And then pollen and seed analysis, which, boys, I'm going to spare you that, all right? I will not list off the pollen and seed analysis, but going there, seeing it for yourself, being in the tomb, that's a whole different experience from just reading about it. But this, as a supplemental material after the fact, absolutely fantastic. I loved it. We have Treasures of the Boyne Valley next. This is by Peter Harbinson. So this has Newgrange, this has Tara, this has, Knowth, and just, everything around that. There's this place that's south of Trim. Trim is this famous Anglo-Norman castle. It's also where a lot of Braveheart got shot. So that castle there, I think it's, the Scottish castle. That was in Braveheart. So that's cool. Got to see that. But the Duke of Wellington was educated around this area. And I don't know, is this true or not? But was Wellington born in the same year as Napoleon? If so, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of cool. They were actually born in the same year. I just looked it up. That's cool. Bective Abbey, that's something that we visited as well. And that was nice. It's all ruins now, but the ruins, it shows that this would have been kind of a grand, beautiful building. Pretty sure it was destroyed thanks to our friend Henry VIII in the Protestant and Reformation and all that stuff. So thank you, Henry VIII. I would say good luck with having a son that lives to maturity, and also good luck with finding the Ark of the Covenant. I wish well on all of our Anglo-Saxon friends. Good luck with the whole Ark of the Covenant thing. Best of luck to you. And I'm definitely skipping around here. This was a good read. It's just not all of it was really quite what I was into, because it's covering a more broad area and also like such a great range of time, when I just really like early medieval Ireland and kind of that. But you have photographs, you have artwork, you have just illustrations, you have the Castle of Slane. Yeah, and our tour guide talked about this, where the current lord of the Manor of Slane, he used to hold a bunch of rock concerts in the field of the castle, and some people would try to swim the River Boyne to get over there without buying a ticket, of course. And shockingly, I know, but many people drowned trying to get over there, so they really had to beef up security and stop people from trying to make the attempt. But yeah, because the River Boyne is not like an easy swim. It wasn't easy. A lot of people died. €15, I can't afford that. I'm going to try it. And we didn't see the marker for it, but of course the Battle of the Boyne, 1690, Protestant victory over the Catholics. They did make a little monument there, and apparently no wonder then that this fine but politically all too sensitive monument with an inscription like that was blown sky high on the Feast of the Assumption in August 1923. So they did blow that up. I somehow doubt that the Catholics would have replaced it, but who knows? I didn't see it, so maybe it is there. Maybe it's next to the Ark of the Covenant. There's a big section on Newgrange, on Knowth, on Dowth, and I've already kind of covered those, so I won't get into it. And I wasn't sick of the information. It's just, reading all these books back to back on similar or the same subject, it kind of, I know this. But at the Hill of Tara, so there's the Mound of Hostages, which is a little mound there. I did not know this until I got there and, reading about it, but I didn't know that it was actually a passage tomb. So that was actually built by Neolithic people, and then later the Irish incorporated it into their mythology. I'm not sure if they quite knew what they had there, but they knew it was like kind of a sacred thing. So yeah, that's interesting. And I had a question for our tour guide, which no fault to him, but he didn't really know the answer, because Tara is obviously abandoned at some point from kind of 500 AD. It's definitely not a true position to hold by the time of Brian Boru, right? And the English don't even bother making a castle or a fort there, so it had certainly lost its significance. It was still important, I guess, sacred to the Irish, but it clearly fell out of use, right? And at what point did it fall out of use? That's kind of up to debate. But the author brought up something called the Marcheology of Angus, written about 800. Tara's mighty burr perished at the death of her mighty princes. With a multitude of venerable champions, the great height of Armagh abides. Right valiant Lowers' pride has been quenched, great the anguish. Patrick's name splendid, famous. This is on the increase. In a word, the pagan king is dead. Long live Christianity. So I guess the Irish back then were also curious, hey, how come we don't really use the Hill of Tara anymore? And it's, I suppose, because there's such a connotation of it being a pagan place that they didn't fully Christianize it or whatever. They couldn't fully remove its pagan roots, so they just decided to abandon it. And the king mentioned there is the name of the king that St. Patrick is supposed to have turned into a Christian, but then if he had turned him into a Christian, why would they abandon it? And Even several hundred years after St. Patrick, there are still people calling themselves High King of Ireland or King of Tara. Not that they physically rule from Tara, but that's still a part of the title that's important to them. So I agree that it was probably abandoned, I don't know, probably more in the 600-ish years or so. They would have just left the site. That makes sense to me. Oh, this is interesting. They have a high cross here, which is something that's unique to Ireland, and it's these really beautiful carved stone crosses. But they describe some of the figures on the cross, and here we find fabulous animals on the upper surfaces, creatures which are not a product of the Celtic imagination that enliven the pages of the Book of Kells, but heritage of classical antiquity that has managed to reach as far north as Ireland through channels we have not yet been able to identify. They have a griffin here, the body of a lion with the head and wings of a bird. Here the griffin probably has a religious meaning because early Christians equated Christ with the lion as Lord of the earth and with the eagle as Lord of the skies. The two together thus symbolized his being the Lord of the universe. A winged lion seen holding a book on top of the shaft above the griffin has sometimes been interpreted as a symbol of the evangelist Mark, though proof is lacking. I remember being at the Rock of Cashel and there was this huge monument thing. It was broken off at the top, but at the when the tower starts to narrow on it, there's an eagle there, and I kind of questioned, why is there an eagle on this statue? I didn't really get it. And yeah, I saw some animal symbolism around as well. I suppose it was their way of, they kind of identified certain Christian figures as animals or whatever, so that's kind of interesting. I'm pretty sure Matthew Stout had a long section about it, so we'll get into that, where he has something to say about that as well, I'm pretty sure. And there are a lot of round towers in Ireland. These were built by Christians, but the author mentions that at some points they were considered to be built by the Phoenicians as fire towers. And yes, we will get into that and why people had that belief. But yeah, that is kind of interesting. We'll get into that more later. We have a little section here on Bective Abbey, and I do love our author's voice here. That did not prevent a subsequent monarch in the rotund shape of Henry VIII closing the monastery down in 1536, at which stage, according to an old tradition recorded in Lorne Dunsany's My Ireland, pretty sure that guy wrote a bunch of fantasy books too. Pretty broad range of history, but all of it was good stuff. That one, yeah, I have nothing but positive things to say about. Now we'll do the Book of Tara by Michael Slavin. Our first section concerns some early mythology. It's stuff that I like. I just know it really well, but it's about the Book of Invasions, the Tuatha-Dé-Danann, the Fomorians, the Firbolg, all of that. So that's your first chapter, which all good stuff I really like. So it's getting into kind of the mythology, everything behind the Hill of Tara. After that, it gets into some of the festivals that would have been celebrated here, such as Lugnasa, Samhain, and Imbolc, or whatever, the spring one, that was the fall one, the summer one, one for each of the 4 seasons, okay? So there you go. It's very late right now, so I'm sorry, but there's a festive holiday for each of the 4 seasons. He even gets into St. Patrick and St. Patrick coming to the Hill of Tara, which in reality he probably did not, and him battling pagan wizards and Christianity triumphs over them, of course. The author says here on page 38 that Tara was abandoned in 565 as the dwelling place of the most powerful kings in Ireland, will always be associated with folklore, with the curse of Ruad'Dan, who was half druid, half saint, and a mighty spiritual and political force in his time. May Tara be desolate to all eternity, said Saint Ruad'Dan according to legends. Monk Angus, writing his martyrology around the year 800 at Mael Ruins Monastery in Talat did not disguise his delight at Tara's gradual fall from glory when he wrote, "The great settlement of Tara has died with the loss of its princes. Great Armagh lives on with its choirs and scholars." That was the guy that we just referenced in the last book, but so, okay. At least by the year 800, Tara definitely would have been abandoned at this point. So that's a good frame of reference. There was a mound there that was a little away from the rest of the sites at the Hill of Tara. It's called Rothmave, so it's supposed to be a little mound, I suppose. It's supposed to be a goddess, and I'm just not super familiar with this one. Is it supposed to be like Mebd or whatever? There's probably some connection there, but whatever. Or it's supposed to be from Queen Maeve in the Tain, but I'm not 100% on it. The author kind of takes some tangents here and there to really get into Irish mythology, which I'm not complaining about. I love it, but yeah, he definitely does do that. And now we're talking about Cuchulainne, we're talking about Tain. Also, the failed 1798 rebellion of the United Irishmen who fought at the Hill of Tara. It did not go well. There was a young girl there. Her name was Molly Weston, and she and her 4 brothers were a part of the battle there, and yeah, they did lose. And we transition from the mythological to the early historical, and, he's talking about some of the kings that would have ruled at Tara, some of the various reasons why Tara was probably abandoned, and it's, basically super pagan, not Christian, so we're going to have to leave this place and never, ever, ever come back. We briefly get into Brian Boru, Maelshachnail II, who was king of the Southern O'Neill and Brian Boru's main rival for the High Kingship, and Brian Boru ends up taking the throne from him, and we kind of cover all that, and then, we touch on the Normans after them. I don't really want this to be true, but I'm pretty sure it is. I know we were just mocking the English about the Ark of the Covenant, but apparently for the Irish, the British sent them a bunch of whiskey before the battle, and when the king's forces arrived, they immediately formed the men into lines. I should say they tried to do so, but the whiskey made them so ungovernable that the lines could not be formed. This state of confusion was kept up until the enemy opened fire on us. The enemy was no more than 500 strong, while the Irish were several thousand, and the English do, in fact, win the day. So maybe that happened, maybe not. What I do know for sure is there was no Ark of the fucking Covenant. And I didn't know this, but the Stone of Destiny was originally placed on top of the Mound of Hostages, but following the 1798 rebellion, they move it to its present location to commemorate the graves of the United Irishmen rebellion. So that was interesting. O'Connell, he was a great speaker. He was known as the Liberator. He would hold monster marches or monster rallies, and he could get hundreds of thousands of people to show up, and they were for home rule, meaning that they would have their own parliament. They would still be a part of the British Empire, but they wanted greater autonomy. England, of course, was not in favor of this, and he got around 500,000 people or so. They throw out a bunch of estimates here, and it was definitely at least over 100,000 people. Daniel O'Connor was a great lawyer. He was an orator and such, but I think he was going to hold one around Dublin or so, and the English, even though they're not breaking any laws, they decide to have the police there and tell them you can't give a speech, so go home. And he decides he's not going to fight the police here, and he goes home, and he never really recovers from this. He's never as popular as he used to be. I think he spends a year or 3 years or so on some kind of BS charges in jail, and then after that he just dies. He also killed a guy in a duel, so that was kind of cool, but I suppose in that type of situation, it's better to fight the police. I don't know, because then it's just open rebellion at that point, but to back down like that, it completely kills whatever momentum that your group had. I don't know if any group really kind of recovers from that. Clontarf, that's it. That's where he got turned away from. He gets into some of the structures that would have been on the Hill of Tara, the banqueting hall, and he thinks that, however, it is now believed more likely that this banqueting hall was more of an ad hoc structure than a permanent building. Perhaps it was constructed of wood and thatch for each Samhain festival somewhere on the Green of Tara and ritually burnt down when the celebration was over. That's an interesting note. Whitepill, why is that interesting? Well, I'm glad you asked. When Finn McCool is a young boy, he's about 10, he wants to join the Fianna, who his father used to lead them. He goes to the Hill of Tara, and the king says, oh, there's this terrible monster, this fire breather that comes out every Samhain, and it puts all the men to sleep, and, oh, if you could slay that monster, then you could ask any one thing of me. So he's like, okay, so then he slays the fire breather, who comes every Samhain and burns it down. Kind of makes you think that maybe the early Irish, later on when they're writing these stories down, that, hey, there are all these burned down timber, wooden buildings, we do this every year. Why do we do this? Is it some pagan thing, or is it, it's because of the fire-breathing monster or whatever? I don't know. I feel like there's some connection there, and that's interesting. But we do, in fact, end there. This one was also very, very good. So, yeah, big props there for the Book of Tara by Michael Slavin. I would say for some people, if you're not into mythology or folklore, it does maybe, to me, it was great. But for some people, it maybe delves a little too much into the mythology, folklore stuff. I loved it, but I could see that as maybe somewhat of a complaint. We have Newgrange here by Geraldine Stout and Matthew Stout. So yes, we do in fact have another book on Newgrange. I know you didn't get enough last time, so here's some more. This book was really good. It was, of course it's going to be somewhat a little dry, but it's very informative. They go over the roof box, they go over the retaining wall. In their research, they believed that the retaining wall was built a little too high, but they still acknowledged that there would have been like a quartz wall there. So they have that all laid out and go over that. They also go over where they went to get the materials used in building Newgrange, south to the Wicklow Mountains for quartz. They went north to the Mourne Mountains, and then just all around. There's just so much sophistication with these people, and they certainly weren't like simple or stupid to just build a structure of this size, of this grandeur, and to have it align with the winter solstice, and to be able to travel so far to grab all your materials, and it's incredible. And I do fucking hate that just on the History Channel or just random schizos online where it's like, how did we build the pyramids? Was it aliens? No, it was just people. It was just people. It's always just people. And they could have rolled the rocks there on logs. They also demonstrate how you could have built a rather primitive boat, and then you could carry the rock, like the boulder, in the water, right? And then it's much lighter to transport, and then you can bring it close to land. And of course they had oxen and stuff like that, so it's just, of course it wasn't some fucking aliens or whatever the fuck. It was just people, right? It was just people, and it was great. The entrance stone was really cool. It has the triple spiral thing, and it's very, very carved. It's maybe the most carved of all of the stones there, but it's this barrier between the living and the dead. I'm not sure what the winter solstice would have meant to the Neolithic people, but it's, you have this burial place for your dead. Sunlight enters the tomb, something with the afterlife, or maybe it like ferries their souls away. I know I've said it's interesting a lot, but I do find this stuff interesting. And they literally go through all of the curbstones and all of the artwork on the curbstones, so you really get your money's worth with this one. They go into the grave goods. We've kind of covered all this with the other Newgrange books, but they also found some stone lamps, meaning they're stones that are, they have a hollow to them, like a dip, and you would put oil in there and burn it, and it would give you light. Also, there's some like stone phallus thing that they found, so that they think that's something, some symbolism there. And then they expand a bit by connecting Newgrange to other passage tombs around, well, Europe, and then, yeah, like Spain, and then in Brittany, and in a pretty big range. So there's definitely a connection between them all, and, or, you know what I mean, like an origin, some roots. And we, yeah, basically end there. Sorry, it's just when you read like 4 books on Newgrange, you kind of, you know, there's not too much to talk about with the 4th book on Newgrange. But again, I think that one's great. They're a little more critical of Professor Kelly, but they also really, they respect him and they give him great props. They believe some aspects of the reconstruction of Newgrange weren't quite correct, but what are you going to do? This now is the longest. This is probably the meatiest of the works to get into, and my favorite. This is Early Medieval Ireland, 431 to 1169 by Matthew Stout. I strongly, strongly recommend this one. If you really like history and you just want some book that can cover much, and it's not covering such a great length of time that it's, you know, as deep as a puddle. I think it's really as deep as an ocean. We begin in early medieval Ireland, 800 BC to 300 AD, and he begins by discussing the Iron Age Celts and their movement into Ireland and the, you know, finding of Iron Age Ireland. We move pretty quickly into Christianity in Ireland with the focus on Patrick. We have this on page 28 that I made a note of. The author says, Patrick's genius lay in his understanding of the critical role that women played in the gradual rise of Christianity throughout Europe. Women are more responsive to primary conversion into new religions generally, influencing men and then the entire household through the more passive process of secondary conversion. Thus, wives and female servants became the conduits through which Christianity entered into the pre-existing pagan world. Interesting that he finds that women are more susceptible to foreign ideas and more able to corrupt the entire household. If you get the woman, you get the kids, you get a worm in the husband's ear. Yes, interesting. Oh, I didn't mean anything by that, my Christian brothers, but interesting that St. Patrick made a note of that in 432. Okay. We have St. Patrick's Confession, and this, he literally has the entire confession. It's not terribly long, but he talks about being captured, taken as a slave, and then hearing the, you know, voice of God and such. And on page 38, we have this. One time I was put to the test by some superiors of mine. They came and put my sins against my hard work as a bishop. This hit me very hard. So much so that it seemed I was about to fall, both here and in eternity. But the Lord in his kindness spared the converts and the strangers for the sake of his name and strongly supported me when I was so badly treated. I did not slip into sin and disgrace. I pray that God hold not this sin against them. They brought up against me after 30 years something I had already confessed before I was a deacon. What happened was that one day when I was feeling anxious and low with a very dear friend of mine, I referred to some things I had done one day, rather in 1 hour when I was young, before I overcame my weakness. I do not know, God knows, whether I was then 15 years old at the time, and I did not then believe in the living God, not even when I was a child. In fact, I remained in death and unbelief until I was reproved strongly and actually brought low by hunger and nakedness daily. Catholic bros? What sin is he referring to? 15 years old, done one day, rather in 1 hour, whatever the sin was, it was wrapped up in a singular hour. He doesn't name the sin here, and I don't believe the sin is ever named, but Christian bros? I'm not like Thanos snap, but it's, Jesus snapping you. What's going on here? What is St. Patrick referring to? I don't know. I just don't know. Certainly interesting. It made me pause. But a few things about St. Patrick really quick. So one, obviously, he did not banish the snakes from Ireland. Snakes have never existed in Ireland. Two, St. Patrick at no point, at least in his confession, which I have read, and I haven't read his other works. I do plan on doing that at some point. I believe there's a text that just combines all of St. Patrick's writings. I think it's called the Tripartite Life of St. Patrick, so I want to get into that. But to my understanding, St. Patrick at no point ever references a shamrock. So no, I don't believe there's any evidence to support that he was able to convert the pagan Irish to Christianity by showing them the shamrock and thus teaching them the Trinity. I think this is something that happens much later, like the 1600s or so, where this gets attributed to Patrick. Also, shamrocks are not only native to Ireland. They're in the US, they're in Europe. Did maybe some Christians use the shamrock to try to explain the Trinity? Yeah, maybe, but you would think that if St. Patrick had such resounding success by teaching, look, this little plant, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that maybe he would have mentioned that in his writings. Also, he notes converting slaves, servants, women, people who hold the reins of power in pagan Ireland. So if this is who St. Patrick was typically converting and bringing over to his faith, that doesn't necessarily ring true that he would challenge the High King of Ireland itself and go battle with druids and do magic on the Hill of Tara. So no, even though technically physically possible, I don't think he ever, and any Christians really ever lit a bonfire on the Hill of Slane to challenge the Hill of Tara like that, because that's not who St. Patrick focused on converting. He never went after huge officials, like leading men of the country or the kingdoms. So that's just a few things on St. Patrick. Not that, I'm not if you're Christian, I'm not trying to poo-poo Patrick too much. I mean, he did great 100 years after he came. Ireland was majority Christian at this point. Obviously, he had a ton of success, but just trying to clear up some of the things with his story. What sin? Oh, maybe what it was, since he was a British slave that was brought over to Ireland, maybe his sin, which took an hour, was him burying the Ark of the Covenant at the Hill of Tara. Oh, that's it. That is the sin. I've got it. I'll never let that go. I will never, ever let that go. He has a chapter on ring forts, and very few ring forts were constructed after 825. They also used crannogs, which were artificial defended lake dwellings, and these started to appear in the 6th century. So you'd have a very narrow strip of land connecting to a little dwelling on a lake, so it would be great for defending. And yeah, these were not as common, but they would appear here and there, and they weren't always just for kings, but they weren't always royal households. That makes sense. Oh, and there was some big deal about Easter, so Ireland used to celebrate Easter at a different date, and then it was the 1630s, and basically the southern half of Ireland agreed to fall in with the church's calendar while the northern half held out for a little bit. The Pope actually sent them a letter condemning their idiosyncrasy. Oh, okay. This was interesting. We have on page 74, we have the Book of Duro, which was written around the year 700. It was on an altar of an Irish monastery. It's the earliest known illuminated manuscript and forms the model for even more works that followed. There are also full-page illustrations of figures representing the four evangelists: Matthew as a man, Mark as an eagle, Luke as a calf or ox, and John as a lion. This representation of the evangelists has Coptic Egyptian Christian origins. So that's definitely interesting. Yeah. When did that kind of fall out of favor, like depicting Christ as, eagle, lion, man, master of the earth and of the air? That's, really interesting. But I guess it's a way to, you would carve these, not the Book of Duro, that's a manuscript, but I guess on high crosses and around you would carve these symbols, and it's easier for your illiterate masses to have an idea, of what they're worshiping or what they represent. Oh, okay. This is interesting. So, Armagh, this is in the north of Ireland in Ulster. This is supposed to be the place that St. Patrick said this is the church that would be primate or be dominant over all other churches in Ireland. So keep that in mind. Armagh is super important. We say here that the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria attempted to reassert its authority northward over the Picts in Scotland and westward into Ireland. Ecgfrith of Northumbria invaded Brega. Brega is the Boyne, where Knowth is, kind of around there, in 685. The Saxons lay waste the plain of Brega and many churches in the month of June. Brega's capital was Knowth in the bend of the Boyne. And the clashes that June are the only known battles between the Saxons and the Irish. And at this time, Canterbury has primacy over the southern British church, and York is trying to claim primacy over the north, and they're also trying to claim control over Northern Ireland. And because they failed to practice the Roman Easter there, it was a justification for the attempted expansion. And Armagh immediately changes to celebrating Easter the way in line with the rest of the church. I believe this is the only mention, I could very well be wrong, of Anglo-Saxons invading Ireland before, the Anglo-Normans, but I think this is the only time that it happens. I could be wrong, but it was interesting. They didn't make much of an impact. They went over there, they fought a few battles, then they went home. There wasn't an attempt to establish a kingdom or control over there, really. Well, I guess there was, but then Armagh joined up with the rest of the church, and I don't think they won their battles, so they didn't really have a reason anymore to go. And Armagh begins this propaganda campaign, and they publish this Life of Patrick, where Patrick says, Armagh is my church. This is the church that will rule all the other churches. So they really ramped that up. Ireland also established something known as the Law of Innocence, and this extended legal protection to children and to the clergy from attack, whether during war or peace. The main purpose of this law was the protection of women. It addressed the crime of rape, as well as punishments for death and physical injury. Strict fines, death, and exile were the range of punishments set out for breaking this law. Its broad acceptance was due in part to the fact that those who guaranteed and enforced it were offered a 1/3 share of the fines. Iona was to receive a further 12 to 25%. Thus, the kindred of the dead woman or child or the church of the dead cleric could receive less than half of the collected fine. Lamentation of this law gave real meaning to the concept of secular power in the loose confederations of ecclesiastical sites known as parousia. So this is in 1697, Iona. This is where the Book of Kells, where they began working on it there. It was founded by Columba. It's off the coast of Scotland. Well, that was cool. I don't know. I feel like that probably would have been enforced, but if you're a really powerful king and you're the one breaking the law, you're like, okay, some little pissant king isn't really gonna come knocking to come collect a fine, you know what I mean? So probably the big players didn't really have to worry about it, but the small guys, it's kind of like today, right? I mean, we have laws against human trafficking and stuff. Epstein's Island still existed. So yeah, that's kind of cool that law existed. It's interesting they even have a breakdown of house size by social grades of your king. This is how large your territory should be. Lord of superior testimony, Lord of constraint, Lord of leadership, Lord of blood vengeance, Lord of vassalry, man of withdrawal, hospitaller, cow freeman of substance, young lord, retired man. He gets into the Book of Kells a little bit. There's this artwork that's kind of cute. Virtually hidden in the depths of the magnificent Chi Rio page is the whimsical depiction of two mice holding the host. Two cats have these mice by the tail while a mouse sits on each cat. That's nice. That's cute. Then we get to the Kings and Vikings section, 795 to 870. Viking attacks at this time are really deadly and dangerous. Iona was attacked in 68. Monks were killed in 806. In 807, the new monastery at Kells was consecrated on the site donated by Armagh. In the span of just 4 years, Ireland's most prestigious monastery had been twice attacked and then abandoned. In 811, the Ullid, meaning the Ulster Irish, were credited with the first recorded slaughter of the Vikings by the Irish, and this event was of such magnitude that it was recorded in annals kept at Charlemagne's court. And the Vikings do change things in Ireland. They say on 155 that in the face of the Vikings, dynasties limited fights between themselves in order to better direct their efforts against foreign invasion. Also, instead of outright war between two kingdoms, assassinations become more popular. 12 are recorded in the 9th century, 12th in the 10th, and 38 in the 11th. Also, they would blind their opponents so that they could not be king instead of just outright killing them. And yeah, that's pretty brutal. Oh, and this is good. This is good on 157. The invasion of the Boyne and Liffey valleys in 837 was followed 3 years later by the first permanent Viking settlement on Lough Neagh. Initially, the annalists record a raiding party, but these Vikings lingered on Lough Neagh in the following year, and in 841 the annals of Ulster chillingly report the heathens were still on Lough Neagh. In 841 the annals also record the establishment of 2 further settlements. Because typically Vikings would show up, they would steal gold, they would take slaves, they would, burn shit, and then they'd go back home. But now they're establishing ports in the cities in Ireland, and it's like, uh-oh, this is different. I forget which French king it was. It might have been Charles the Fool or Charles the Bald, one of them. But they were being attacked by Vikings a bunch. So one of them decides, it's like around the year 900, that, hey, these guys keep attacking us, and then they go away, and then they come back and attack us. And in a situation like that, the advantage is always going to be with the attacker, because they can attack anywhere at any time, and you have to be on guard 24/7 and cover all your territory, which you can't do, and they know that. So what does he do? He makes a deal with some of the Vikings, and it's Rollo, the pseudo-mythical, he's a real person, but he is the father of the Normans, and he just says, hey, I'm going to make you, I think it's a duke or a baron or whatever, and you're going to have Normandy, and you are going to protect France from further Viking raids. which is great for Rollo because now he's a very powerful lord in France, and also he knows how to fight Vikings and keep them away. But furthermore, for the French, you now have the Normans right here. So if they ever betray you or side with the Vikings, then you get to attack and plunder his lands. You wouldn't have to go, across the sea to Denmark or Norway. There's also a note of the dark heathens making a great slaughter of the fair-haired foreigners and plundered the naval encampment, both people and property. The dark heathens made a raid at Lynn Duchal, and a great number of them were slaughtered. So these are Danes versus the Norse. They weren't all just working together against the Irish. And I'm a little surprised by the amounts that fall in these battles. They record numbers like 1,200 men dying in a battle in 847 and 2,200 dying in 848. Which, I don't know, that sounds like an incredible amount of men during that time, but whatever. Author gets into some high crosses and the carved art on them, and then we are in Viking towns and rural change. So we had a 40-year hiatus basically free of the Vikings from 873 to 913. The Vikings were actually expelled from Dublin in 902. Oh, and Round Towers are obviously earlier than this, but the first mention of them is in the year 950. He says here on 174 that the burial mounds of Knowth, Dowth, and Newgrange were dishonored. Again, based on some of the other books I've read, I don't believe that Newgrange itself was attacked, but Knowth and Dowth for sure. In 869, the primate of the Irish Church, Armagh, is plundered with the death or enslavement of 1,000 people, which, I don't know, I'm trying to picture Armagh. I guess it is a pretty significant size. Then we get to the big section. This is with Brian Boru. This is with Mael Shechnell II. This is for Brian Boru. His first recorded act in 977 was the killing of the King of Foreigners of Limerick and his 2 sons in the monastery of Pagan Ireland on the Shannon estuary. This raises the intriguing possibility that the Limerick Vikings were Christian at this time, as the annals of Innisfallen refer to this act as a violation. So they're both young men. Brian Boru, his power base is in the southwest in Munster, and Mael Shechnell, he is with the Southern O'Neills, so he's in Meath, which is sort of in the middle, with Tara around there, and the O'Neills, the Northern O'Neills and the Southern O'Neills were typically the most powerful family in Ireland, they're very powerful, and the High Kingship, at least symbolically, would go from Southern O'Neill to Northern O'Neill, Southern and North, with some rare exceptions in between, and Brian Boru is going to be one of those exceptions. There's a Battle of Tara in 980. The High King Mael Shechnell takes Dublin after 3 days. The foreigners are forced to give up their slaves and hostages and treasure and 2,000 cows. Oh, and the King of Dublin was sent into exile seeking communion and repentance in Iona, indicating that the Vikings of Dublin were, like their Limerick brethren, also Christian. So that is interesting. Oh, and Mael Shechnell is now going after Brian Boru. He goes into the territory of his family and he cuts down the sacred tree that crowned their inauguration site at Mag Adar near Tulla, County Clare. I've seen that mentioned before where Irish kings would have a inauguration site and there would be a sacred tree associated with it. I guess it carries over from pre-Christian times, but that's kind of cool. Not cool that Mael Shechnell came and chopped your tree down, but it's cool that they had a tree. In 989, Mael Shechnell, he takes Dublin again, and this time the siege took 20 days, and afterwards a tax was imposed on the defeated town. An ounce of gold was levied on every household in the town to be paid annually at Christmas, which is different from what a lot of Irish kings do, and this is more in line with what more contemporary European kingdoms are doing. They levy taxes. They're not just raiding each other and then taking treasure and cows and slaves and such. They're establishing a bureaucracy, they're establishing a hierarchy, right? So it's different. It doesn't really last, but it's like one of the few signs that the Irish were moving toward a more contemporary European state. There was Maelsechnaile's ring fort, and there was a hoard found there in this crannog, and it consisted of 61 silver ingots. These massive ingots are not Viking in character, so therefore they must represent native Irish wealth. Brian and Maelsecchnaile, they fight a little bit, and then they decide that they're going to split Ireland between the two of them, a northern half and a southern half, and then later on Brian takes Dublin, so now he controls all the Viking towns. And then he forms a big coalition against Maelsecchnaile that has armies from Dublin, South Connaught, from Osraige, Lagan, I think that's Leinster, and is that Ossory? I think it's Ossory. That's probably the anglicized version of that. Maelsecchnaile, in trying to stop him, he builds the Annals of Innisfallen called a Great Obstruction across the Shannon at Athlone with the help of the King of Connaught. I came across that tidbit a long time ago that Maelsecchnaile built bridges across the Shannon to stop Brian Boru's ships from sailing up it, but this confirms it. So yeah, I did like that I finally got a source on it. Brian has most of the island under his control in 1005, except for the northern O'Neill. So because he gets Maelsecchnaile to submit to him, and he goes on campaign there, and Brian Boru is one of the only kings who calls himself High King that could legitimately claim that he had dominion over all kingdoms in Ireland. So, yes, he's one of the few that can do it. But then, of course, we have the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. We had the King of Leinster and also Brian's son-in-law, King Sitric of Dublin, who was the first man to mint coins in Ireland. He's a Viking. Brian married Sitric's mother, so whatever. It's a little complicated, but Brian's army technically wins the day, but both Brian, his son, and I think even like his grandson, so his family is greatly weakened. They're all killed in the battle, so things are hazy for the O'Briens. Maelsecchnaile at this time, who did not participate in the battle, even though he was supposed to assist Brian Boru, he just kind of stood on the sidelines and waited to see how it was going to go. He is unopposed in claiming the High Kingship, and he has the High Kingship until his death, I believe. Sitric, later on in life, he will go on a pilgrimage to Rome, and he builds the first cathedral in Ireland. This is Christ Church Cathedral in Dublin. Oh, okay. We had something here in England. This is later on. This is during the times of Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor, he was forced to marry into the Godwinson, I believe it's Godwinson family, and he doesn't like these guys because their father was responsible for the death of his brother, and eventually he kicks the Godwinsons out of England, and Harold, he ends up fleeing to Dublin, and the King of Dublin gives him shelter there, and then, later Harold goes back, and of course the King of Dublin doesn't cash in on a favor because Harold loses the Battle of Hastings. Oh, and interesting note, the man who helped Harold Godwinson was Diarmait, and Diarmait's great-grandson would go to England and to seek redress when he was exiled from Leinster in 1166, precipitating the Anglo-Norman invasion 3 years later. Yes, there is a connection there, and it's a little ugly, but there you go. No, we had a note here on 239 that I just had to bring up. In 1079, 5 Jews came from overseas with gifts to Tardolbach. Many Jews had come from Normandy on the occasion of William's conquest of England. William the Conqueror protected the rights of Jews, and they found a place in the burgeoning Norman administration of this newly conquered kingdom. These Jews may have been seeking the same positions and status in Ireland that they held in London. The entry tersely states that they were sent back over the sea. Ireland clearly did not lightly embrace foreigners. The annals referred to the Vikings as foreigners for more than 3 centuries after they had first settled on the island. Boys, I'm thinking Ireland based and Normans not based. I'm gonna throw that out there that the Normans were in fact not red-pilled, perhaps. We also talk about the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lanfranc, and his primary concern upon his appointment was establishing Canterbury's primacy over York and securing his office in the foremost authority over the Irish Church as well. Lanfranc wrote to the Pope claiming Canterbury's primacy over Ireland, and Pope Gregory VII accepted this claim. This is important. We will get to this later. After this, we have a lot of Irish reforms. We have a lot of reforms in the Irish Church. We have the basically weakening and destruction of the Kingdom of Meath, which was always the 5th Kingdom of Ireland, the 5th province, and basically it just gets raided over and over again. And we had one king here on page 252, King Muirthemne. He was not able to control all of Ireland, but he was perceived abroad as the King of Ireland in the same way his father Tardalbach had been. And he received correspondence from the Archbishop of Canterbury and a gift from Edgar, King of Scotland, in 1105, a camel of remarkable size. So that's nice. He got a camel. So and it's weird. I mean, I guess North Africa is right there. You would send a boat to get a camel and then bring the camel up to Scotland. But, you know, the camels don't really belong in Scotland. It just seems like a big hassle to have a camel in Scotland. Like, sure, you have a camel. No one else has a camel. But do you really want a camel? This was interesting on 265. We also had on 264 the Cross of Cong. This is a really beautiful piece of art. It was established under Tardalbach, one of the great kings of Connaught. But on 265 we had the Shrine of St. Lachtan's Arm. The shrine, which may have once held an arm bone of St. Lachtan, is made of wood covered with richly engraved cast bronze plates. This defiant artistic statement emerged from Munster as an elegantly crafted arm with a clenched fist. The gesture of the hand in a fist is different from every other medieval arm-shaped reliquary in Europe, where shrines show either an open hand or a hand with 2 fingers raised in blessing. If this shrine is not a belligerent gesture in itself, its construction signals at the very least Cormac's ambitions to high kingship. That's really, really cool. We had something which maybe it would kind of piss off Irish nationalists a little bit, but Matthew Stout here on 270 says, "Neither can we detect evolving monarchy, the birth pangs of a new feudalism, or any sense that the years preceding the Anglo-Normans represented a transitional period for Irish kingship. Ireland was reforming the church a bit, but they didn't really destroy other kingships, other dynasties. Instead, they were just fighting the same wars against other dynasties, and yeah, new dynasties would pop up every now and then, but it was just back and forth without anyone realistically being able to, make any huge plays. The Kingdom of Connaught did not keep expanding until it took over all of Ireland. There was still the Kingdom of Ulster. Maybe there was a different king there because you killed the last king, but it was still a separate kingdom to yours, and maybe they submitted to you, maybe they didn't. But unlike the rest of Europe, there's no, hey, we conquered you, you are no longer kings, now you're earls. You're not a subservient king, you're not even a king at all. That didn't really happen in Ireland. Something that I've really wanted to study with English history, because I think, to understand Irish history, you gotta study English history a bit, but there's Alfred the Great, right? And I'm kind of foggy on it, but there's Alfred the Great. He is the king of Wessex, and when the Vikings almost take over all of England, his is the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom. I think he fights the Vikings for a bit, and they establish something called the Danelaw, where the Vikings hold a good portion of England still, but then there's, the rest of England, which Wessex controls. But before the Vikings took all this territory, To my understanding, there was Northumbria, there was Sussex, Essex, Wessex, something else. There were like 5 of them, right? And maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like since Alfred was able to be the last standing kingdom and all the other Anglo-Saxon kings were defeated and their dynasties were dispelled, once the Vikings were done away with, then he was the only one to be able to claim kingship. It's not like the former kings of Sussex rose up and like, hey, you know, we're still the kings of Sussex. We're still the kings of Essex or Northumbria. So I think in that way, the English have something of an advantage, right? Because, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and, you know, Wessex had to fight off the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms who were trying to rise up again and declare themselves kings. Maybe Alfred was able to just convince them to be bought off with being earls or dukes or whatever. But I don't know, it's interesting. It's very different from Irish history where they're able to really control and to kind of box in the Vikings to these port cities. And they also form alliances with them and intermarry. That's also a factor, but the Vikings never control huge amounts of Ireland, and because of that, the Irish structure, these like fractured kingdoms, are never really disrupted. And I think perhaps that was sort of a hampering effect on the Irish. They maybe got a little too lucky, maybe they're a little too successful in fighting off the Vikings, and therefore their, you know, political hegemony was never really threatened. They never had to consolidate, and there was never, oh my God, the kingdom of Ulster is the last kingdom, and then Ulster goes on a great campaign and reconquers Ireland from the Vikings, and it's like, hey, you know what? There's only one king of Ireland now, and it's us. Everyone else, you're a lord or something, but it's just us. I really want to find a great book about that. I'm sure that book does exist about, you know, the Kingdom of Wessex and what happened with the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and if there was ever like any fighting after this because they didn't want to accept, you know, a lower position to Wessex. And the Irish, when they did war, they would also take hostages from other kingdoms and such, but it was very rare that even if the king you took hostages from would betray you, that you would actually kill your hostages. Sometimes that did happen, but typically not. So it's like, I don't know, it's sort of a more or less empty threat where you're not really going to kill this guy's kids, but it's there. Oh, I have to discuss this. I'm sorry to any of our Irish friends, and I would like to extend a heartfelt apology to all of our English friends. But boys, I discovered something when reading this book, that in fact, everything that happened between England and Ireland after the year 1148 was entirely Ireland's fault. In fact, England was the victim, and it was the Irish all along. It was always the Irish. And what we've been fed is a centuries-long propaganda campaign against the English, which is simply false. Allow me to explain. The founding of Christ Church Cathedral, the first cathedral in Ireland, the first bishop was Donnan, and he was consecrated in Canterbury. So he was subject to the authority of Canterbury. So Dublin, where Christ Church Cathedral is, had a long-standing relationship with Canterbury, and a lot of bishops in Christ Church Cathedral were consecrated in Canterbury, and then they came over to Christ Church Cathedral, right? So there's this very long-standing relationship there. Oh, but in 1148, they have the synod held at St. Patrick's Island, and they are trying to set up four archdioceses on the island, which is kind of crazy because Ireland is rather small, and England, Ireland's nearest neighbor, required only 2 archdioceses. But boys, what does this mean? What does this mean that Ireland is now forming 4 archdioceses, and they also established the Church of Armagh as the primate over all of them, so Armagh is, you know, it has sole authority over them all? Well, So they meet, and then in 1150, the Pope appointed Cardinal Paparo to bring the four Palia to Ireland, the official recognition of the agreement worked out at St. Patrick's Island. Paparo's first mission turned back after reaching England because King Stephen refused to grant the delegation safe passage through his kingdom. Paparo returned a year later in the winter of 1151, but this time he traveled across the far north of England from Teignmouth to Carlisle and relied on the protection of King David of Scotland. Finally, in 1152, the synod meets at Kells, and they conform the four decrees. And I won't get into the anarchy and Henry II and the Norman barons, and they were on the wrong side of the anarchy, so that's why they were seeking new lands, and they went to Ireland. What matters is in 1154, Henry II becomes king, and he was encouraged by the bishops and clergy of England to consider a conquest of Ireland in September 1155. What inspired this novel interest in Ireland? The church reforms of the Synod of Kells/Mellifont 3 years earlier irked the English clergy, who had long campaigned for sovereignty over the Irish Church. Irksome, too, was the fact that Cardinal Paparo had passed through the north of England under the protection of the Scottish rather than the English king on his way to provide the papal blessing for those reforms. There's also some discussion of the papal bull in 1155 granting Henry the right to attack Ireland. The only record of this document is in Gerald of Wales' Topographica Hibernica, and it has long been regarded as a fabrication. Not sure if that's true. It might be fake, it might not be. I mean, the pope that grants the papal bull is the only English pope, so it's possible. Boys, what did you expect to happen? Like, the Irish, look what you did to the English. First of all, you severed the tie between Canterbury and Christchurch Cathedral. Then you had the audacity to not go through England, but to go past England to Scotland to then get to Ireland. What did you want England to do? You know, like, Jesus Christ, how can you hurt someone more than that? All things considered, between England and Ireland for basically the next 1,000 years, whatever happened there.
Whatever happened there?
All right then.
Whatever happened there?
The shooting.
Whatever happened there?
God rest his soul, man.
I'll tell you what fucking happened.
Was justified. Was utterly and completely justified. Is there not just a shred of empathy, of human understanding from the Irish to the English? How the English must have felt at this time to be snubbed not once but twice?
And kill me now. Go on, go into the ham. And take the carving knife and stab me. Here, now, please. It would hurt me less than what you just said.
You know, I know seniors that are inspired.
What was England supposed to do? The Irish are animals. That's long been established. That's not, shocking to anybody. And basically, the grandson of the man who helped, the great-grandson of the man who helped Harold Godwinson, he gets in some trouble with the Irish, so he is expelled from Ireland, and he goes to England seeking help from Henry II, which, unfortunately, for some, he did, in fact, find and get. Oh, and I did not know this before, but apparently in 1165, just a year prior to his exile, Diarmait contributed the Dublin fleet to England's attempt to subdue the northern Welsh. That's interesting. I assume the Welsh question is dealt with in Henry II's time. I believe it would have been. And then we had Richard de Clare, or also known as Strongbow. He was once a powerful lord who fell foul of Henry II to such a degree that the English king confiscated his lands in Wales. This is because during the anarchy you had Henry II's mother, Empress Maud, versus King Stephen, and Richard's family supported King Stephen against Henry's mother, and then, of course, Henry II is the next king, and he doesn't forget. Henry gave permission for Richard and a couple of other Norman lords, like, go to Ireland, take as much land as you can, you have my blessing. But he still doesn't fully trust Richard because they're not on good terms, so he makes Strongbow come to Wales and submit to his authority, and this is good enough for Henry, so he makes him royal constable in Ireland, and he grants him lands that he already conquered. But then Henry comes from England to Ireland with a fleet of 400 ships, with a big army. He comes to Waterford in 1171. He also puts a man in power, de Lacy, as a counterbalancing act to Richard de Clare, and then Henry goes back home to England. And of course, this is when Gerald of Wales is writing his Topographica. The Normans are very successful at first. They are able to take a bunch of land in Ireland, and then Henry's going, hey, wait a minute, I'm not on good terms with these guys. I had confiscated a bunch of their lands in Wales, and now they control some really powerful ports in Ireland. They're intermarrying with the Irish. Well, at least de Clare does. He marries the daughter of Dartmouth, and I think they have a daughter, I believe, but irregardless, but things are not great for Henry, so he just goes over there to make sure, like, hey, don't betray me, don't form an army over here and then return. And that is where we end our book. This is it. There's so much information in here. It's so good. This was excellent. I do basically agree, unfortunately, that I don't think the Irish were really going to form a contemporary state as other European countries had. I think they were just simply too fractured, and they just kind of needed something to unite them or some external force to conquer most of them, but they also would have needed to defeat that force and then be the only player left on the table. So still, an incredible amount of history here. It's very deep. It's very detailed. This is amazing. It looks like there's not too many other books by Matthew Stout, which is kind of disappointing, but I saw that he's an editor for a few things, so I'm definitely going to check those out. But yeah, this is great. Probably the best of the lot, and it's not really close. Now we're on to The Way That I Went. This is by Robert Lloyd Prager. As I said several hours ago, I think this is going to be a long video, especially the early medieval Ireland. I promise that that's going to be the one that, is the longest, but there's the most to talk about there, so that's not a bad thing. But again, this is his, recording of him traveling around Ireland, various things that he did. It can be incredibly dry at times, so once more, that's a big preface, but a lot of it is great. This is also not a guidebook to Ireland. He's only talking about things that interested him, and he can be sparse here and there, but yeah, so just keep that in mind. And apparently in 1990, there was a book published called In the Way That I Followed. This is by the great naturalist Frank Mitchell, celebrating his own long exploration of the landscape, revisiting Prager's countryside with the benefit of new scientific techniques and insight. He founded a magazine called The Irish Naturalist, and his great initiative in island ecology was the Clare Island Survey, which was, so this wealthy merchant, they bought a small island and they did like a big scientific survey there. They found 5 species new to science, 3 worms, a mite, a bristletail, and 17 new to the British Isles, and added almost 19 species to the Irish flora and fauna. Oh, he also got elected president of the Royal Irish Academy in the early 1930s. He talks about how he started at, I believe it was Queen's College in Belfast, and he was very unhappy there. He wanted laboratory training, which he never really got. It was just kind of lectures and such, and so he was a part of something called the Belfast Field Club. Go out in nature and gather samples and make recordings, and that's really what he wanted to do. That's what he loved, and of course, he goes on this big journey around Ireland, and it's not He took 5 years off of his life to go travel around Ireland. This was just like over the weekends and trips and such. He didn't just take like 5 years all in one lump sum. No, he talks about this letter from a visitor to Ireland, on page 19. The jingle, as represented in Dublin, seems to have impressed the visitor even less favorably than the noddy. At the Pigeon House, writes Gregory Greendrake, were collected a number of vehicles of which you can form no idea. They are called jingles from the jingling or rumbling noise produced by their motion, consequent of their crazy and wretched condition. The Irish seem particularly fond of the application of nicknames. The jingle has 4 wheels, the body like a sociable or berlin. It is drawn by one miserable half-starved spectre of a horse, and the driver or jingle man seated in front exhibits in his person a most disgusting combination of nudity, dirt, and rags. One suspects that Master Gregory had been very seasick, for there follows more violent abuse of the jingle man, but he recovers soon and admits that Dublin is a fine city. He also has some really nice black and white photographs, but yeah, I'm not going to really get into it. He's basically going over all of Ireland, Tory Island, Donegal, the north. He goes to the south. So I'm only going to stop when I have things of note. Oh, the Irish were sent on an expedition to Rockall, which took place in June 1896. Rockall is a name known to few, familiar to none. I had no idea what this was before I read this. It is north of Ireland. It's between like Ireland and Iceland. It's this speck of rock, and it's really difficult to land on. They have very rough weather, so they're unable to land after 2 attempts, so they don't actually get on the island. But if it can even really be called an island, it's so small. But it's interesting. They do some dredging there, and they find some new species and such, and so it's not completely bad, right? They do get something out of it, but I did some more research on Rockall. The lovely thing about it is that apparently this is the last territorial conquest of the British Empire. It's Rockall, this little speck of nothing in the Atlantic Ocean. It really made me think that I kind of wish for Dino Storm's upcoming Westman game that DLC, hidden level, bonus stage, something. The last territorial expansion of the British Empire, Rockall, that should be a little stage or something. That's kind of cool, but whatever. I mean, it's interesting. I kind of want to, I think I will use it for something, but it's cool. I mean, there's like nothing there, but it's like a desolate rock. He talks a little bit about the Annals of Four Masters. The last entry records the death of Hugh O'Neill in 1666, and the record ends with a panegyric on that powerful and mighty lord. And he talks a lot about rocks. We're talking about, the Giant's Causeway, the Fomorian Footsteps, and is this volcanic rock or is this not? Apparently, it was a really big deal to geologists, and a lot of people stopped being friends because of it, and they got in some really nasty arguments. Okay, here it is. Page 63. The Gold Ornaments Trial of 1893, which was a remarkable and indeed unique legal episode. So, basically, this guy's plowing a field. He comes across something, and there's some gold objects in there. He brings them to his, landlord or the owner of the farm, and they sell them to the British Museum. So the Royal Irish Academy hears about this afterwards, and then they bring up a lawsuit that they should have the items. The state solicitor claimed them as treasure trove, the Academy being the body appointed to represent the crown in such matters roughly stated the law of treasure trove amounts to this: if precious objects such as these are found under circumstances which points to their having been lost or abandoned, then it is a case of finders keepers. But if there is evidence that they were concealed or deposited with the intention of ultimate recovery, then the crown claims them on behalf of the unknown next of kin. The trustees of the British Museum refused to deliver up the objects on the ground that they were not treasure trove, and so the issue was joined, and the Irish government requested the English law officers to take action for the recovery. The British Museum said that the articles were deposited in a local lake, which flowed into this land. So the objects were tossed into the lake, they said, and therefore not meant to be recovered. They suggested that they had been cast overboard from a ship as a votive offering and were therefore abandoned. Involved questions were also raised regarding the law of treasure trove. Matters of the latter kind were for lawyers. So there's this big trial in London. Menannon MacLear was dragged in as an Irish sea god. Fraser's golden bow was well to the fore. The judge got restive over this wealth of folklore and legend and protested once or twice. Prager is there to testify that the English are lying and that the land, the spot where the treasure was found, in no way was underwater, hundreds of years ago when the treasure would have been left there. Therefore, it was not tossed into any lake, and therefore it was meant to be recovered at some point. So the Irish win the court case, and this stuff got put in, I believe, the National Museum. So every now and then he has these wonderful, lovely little tangents just like that, but there is definitely really long kind of dry periods in between them, but the tangents themselves are fantastic. He's traveling to some mountains. They talk about looking for places to stay. We were successful, however, in securing a lodging for the night. A room measuring 6 feet by 5 with a single bed set the 5-foot way. Now my length between perpendiculars when in an altitude of repose is 6 feet, and Dr. Donahan's is 6'3". Fortunately, there was a small window at the bottom of the bed, and by taking out the sash, we could project our superfluous length into the yard beyond. In the morning, the hens had discovered a new and comfortable perching place. On 137, he talks about being at Carrowkeel, and a survey of the hill showed us that the flat rifted top had on it 14 burial cairns, 2 ruined dolmens, and a group of some 50 circular stone foundations, the remains of a prehistoric village. I had the privilege of being the first to crawl through the entrance passage, and I did so with no little awe. I lit 3 candles and stood a while to let my eyes accustom themselves to the dim light. There was everything just as the last Bronze Age man had left it, 3,000 to 4,000 years before. I believe that this is incorrect, and it would have been Neolithic and not Bronze Age, but maybe I'm mistaken. Anyways, he has some little diagrams of the chambers, and they are like Newgrange in that they end in a cruciform, so there's 3 little recesses at the end of a long passage. But still, really impressive that he was able to be the first one to go through it. He talks about animals a little bit. He calls basking sharks huge lazy creatures. They loll on or about the surface without fear and without guile, showing above water their high dorsal fin as they open their shark jaws to scoop in 10,000 copepods at a gulp. Copepods. He spends a good chapter in the Burren, and that was my favorite part of Ireland, so that was nice as well. On 265, he gets into the history of the shamrock, and I believe the first mention is in 1570. A Flemish botanist records that the Irish freebooters eat cakes made of the meadow trefoil, which is a shamrock. They keep saying that the Irish eat shamrocks, but this is when they're reduced to starvation, so maybe that actually was true. And the shamrock badge or emblem makes its first appearance in literature in the year 1681. The older Irish manuscripts are silent, as are the numerous lives of St. Patrick and other early sources concerning the attractive legend which connects Ireland's patron saint with their national emblem, and the shamrock as an Irish emblem dates back no further than 1681. For the Hilatara, he does complain that but very few sites of so great interest have so little to show. a low, broad, swelling hill commanding a wide prospect, and about its summit a few raths and mounds and other earthworks and an odd pillar stone. That is all, save a hideous modern statue of St. Patrick. Jeez, dude, relax. He talks about enthusiasts were allowed to dig here searching for the Ark of the Covenant, causing further confusion. But he's thankful that it was made illegal later on. He gets into the Clare Island survey, which I think is still like a big deal in the scientific community. It was really incredible. Just what they were able to do in recording all the animals in life, and because of that they have a good control group to base like other things off of. I don't know. I don't really understand the science shit, but yeah, it's cool. Talks about this cool cave, the Cave of Dunmore, which is not one of the most extensive or remarkable, but it has a wide entrance, which means it's, been visited a lot over the years by various groups, so that's kind of cool. Talks about the Rock of Cashel. There's nothing like Cashel anywhere in Ireland. It must be seen, not read about. I agree. It was really impressive walking around. He also talks about something that I had no idea existed. Apparently in Europe, this was a few thousand years ago, but actually the species went extinct in the late 1800s, or I guess the mid 1800s. But it was the great auk, A-U-K. It was black and white. It was a large flightless bird. It wasn't quite a penguin, but penguins were named after them. These creatures were around in like North America and in Europe, and eventually we killed so many of them because they weren't very good at avoiding humans. They just kind of waddled around. They went further north to like Iceland, but in the mid 1800s the species was near extinction, and then it finally died, and I think it was 1834 or so. Somehow a great auk had come very far south to Waterford, and a fisherman caught it in his net, and it was brought to a scientist, I believe, and they nursed it for about 40 days, but it still died. That was one of the last ones, but yeah, eventually the species goes extinct. They had like two fishermen that were wrestling with some birds, and they were going to kill them to bring them back and have them like stuffed in a museum. And during the scuffle, one of the fishermen like steps back and accidentally crushes the last egg. So that's how the species ends, and it's kind of horrifying. Well, that's sad, man. That's kind of fucked up that we used to have like European penguins, and then they're just gone now. Fuck the dodo. Bring back the great auk. That's like, yeah, that's our thing. Like, normies can have the dodo. We'll have the great auk. He talks about Killarney here, and he says this on 370. If you have been lucky and have got a day of that indefinable, astonishing Killarney atmosphere, you will admit that in your life you have never seen anything more lovely. But to be rowed about, fortunately motorboats are still almost unknown, one of a party of 8 with a running commentary such as, "Look now, there's the Elephant Island, Fornistia. Do you see his trunk and his little eye? But he won't touch ye, sort. There was once a giant that keeps you firmly pinned down to earth when you might be away in whatever sort of Elysium the enchantment makes for you." He talks a little bit about Carrincuntil, which is the tallest mountain in Ireland. I don't know, do we have anyone that has climbed the tallest mountain in Ireland here? Oh, is that just me? Am I the only one here who has done it? Well, I suppose it's not that big of a deal. I mean, you've climbed the tallest mountain of somewhere, right? Oh, okay. No, well, just checking. Just asking. We have a great story here. This is when he went to the Blasket Islands on 381. At the same time, I confess, when I recall the Blaskets, I mostly think of snails. When I botanized there, one of the party was A.W. Stillfox of the National Museum, who was investigating the mollusca. The island children, consumed with curiosity, followed us about and watched with astonishment the collecting of box snails and slugs. Presently, we went home to our usual dinner of 1 herring and potatoes. When we emerged again, a deputation was waiting for us, half the children of the island bearing cans, boxes, saucers, cloth caps, and what not full of crawling mollusks, which they told us a penny or two might add to our possessions. It was difficult to explain to them that only certain rare kinds were sought for. When they realized that their labor had been in vain, the whole of their spoils were emptied at our feet, and for the rest of our stay the cottage, inside and out, was alive with these interesting but unwelcome animals, which with misdirected energy penetrated to every corner and wrote their slimy autographs on the wall and floor and ceiling. Yes, I do believe that summarizes Irish children rather well. That just captures their race. And I'll end here on 383. I said at the beginning that I had no intention of writing a guidebook to Ireland, and no one would be so rash as to describe by that name the desultory chapters. I can only retort that he was warned that I have done what I said I would, and I have roamed at random. Another point, I can hear a reader, I assume that I shall have at least one, grumbling that human interests have not received in these pages the respect which is their due, that I have written of the rocks and flowers, birds and beasts, and I have paid scant homage to the towns and their myriad fellow creatures who live or have lived in them. Basically, he believes in the study of nature, and other people write about human activities, so let them do it. I liked it. Some good, funny anecdotes, but yeah, Jesus Christ, some very long sections where not much is happening except for the discussion of rocks and such. Boys, that is not it. We still have one more title and then some articles and shit. Oh my god, it's so fucking late. I'm sorry. I thought this was going to be over like 2 hours ago. That's my bad. Quickly, the Tara and the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so the Irish nationalists, they get upset following this. I have some, badly cropped images of pages I took note of. Of course, I couldn't mark the book, so it's a little difficult for me to see exactly what I'm looking for. Some Irish nationalists, Yeats, Hyde, Moore, and Griffith, they go to the Hill of Tara to protest. The British Israelites have a guy with a rifle there, and he threatens to shoot anyone that comes across. One of the guys, Griffith, crosses, and the man with the rifle did not shoot. Something interesting to note is that Yeats is and was like a popular Irish nationalist, bringing back Irish mythology, mysticism, whatever. But in this little group, they engage in a lot of purity spiraling. They say the English language was a plausible fallacy. Yeats was much exercised about his inability to learn the native language. So it's interesting, even though they're like such a small, tiny group, they still will purity spiral each other, even though they're all basically on the same side and agree with 95% of each other's points. I definitely couldn't relate to that in the slightest. Griffith, who we talked about before, he was a part of a newspaper that was writing articles about the British digging at the Hill of Tara. He also became the founder of Sinn Féin, and he was involved in the Celtic Literary Society and the Gaelic League and the Irish Republican Brotherhood. He wrote articles in the United Irishman entitled Tara of the Kings. Griffith also believed that Ireland's glorious past had been associated with paganism and that the introduction of Christianity had essentially destroyed native Irish culture. He also believed that round towers were phallic temples, and he does not believe that round towers could have been built by Christians. So he's such a special boy that no, Christians are not capable of creating these round towers. They have to be associated with pagan Ireland, and also the British Israelites. And at the times, it was believed that the Irish were literally incapable of building these round towers. So some people believe that the Vikings had built them, and others believe that they were Phoenician fire towers. As insane as that sounds, This is, of course, coming from the people that believe that they're going to find the Ark of the Covenant, so maybe it's not too far-fetched that people would believe that. I know that the Irish had like a hard go of it and such, but I didn't think the racism was so bad that they thought the Irish were incapable of building some fucking towers, right? I mean, the round towers that I saw over there were impressive and everything, but seriously? Like, I didn't know, like, I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize it was that bad that you literally don't think that these people are capable of creating that. Oh, they also believe that the English language was simply the Hebrew language varied by time and overlaid with Germanisms, and also that the study of ancient Irish find it a marvelous resemblance to Hebrew. So yes, they're kind of just connecting dots however possible. There's a man, Vallancey, who published an essay on the antiquity of the Irish language in 1772 when he talked about theories between the relationship between the Irish language and the ancient Semitic Phoenician language. By 1770, he considered himself a master of the ancient language. This opinion was not shared by the 19th century Celtic scholar John O'Donovan, who, on reading a note on a manuscript studied by Vallancey, wrote that the latter had shown his gross ignorance. I like Vallancey. I know I'm not supposed to like him, but there's some bond, there's some connection between the two of us, our gross ignorance. They apparently planned to present the Ark of the Covenant to Queen Victoria and then to her son, Edward VII. Their monarch was viewed in a messianic light. The Christian Messiah was imagined to be a particular wise and just monarch of Davidic descent who would restore the national fortunes. So they dig on and off for 3 years. They don't find anything. There are some coins, some Roman coins. And this does have a effect of stoking Irish nationalism, and you see, like, we have the founder of Sinn Féin, we have the United Irishmen, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, all of these things are brewing in the background, and what they see as a cultural atrocity, which it was, is really giving the Irish a rallying cry. And then, of course, you have the Easter Rising in 1916, so a few years after this point. And so it's interesting. I'm glad I didn't buy the book. I don't think it's worth $50 or whatever. And it was a bit dry. I know I've read plenty of texts here that were rather dry, but this one in particular was more dry than usual. It was informative, but yeah, somewhat lacking. Okay, now I have a few quick, digital texts that I went into. We have the Voyage of the Hu Cora. This is about a wealthy landowner. He and his wife don't have any kids, so they make a pact with the devil. They were born at the beginning of night, midnight, and the end of the night. They serve evil, destroy churches, have a vision to serve God, and then they go around rebuilding all of their churches. Eventually, they are told by God to get on a ship and go on a journey, so they get a little crew together, and they're gone for, I believe, 40 days and nights. They visit some isles that in earlier voyage tales have been visited, like the Island of Sorrow, the Island of Joy, the Island of, apples, the Great Silver Pillar, which was mentioned in the Voyage of Maeldun, Flagstones of Hell. This guy wrote on a Sunday, so he's burning in hell. The Miller of Hell. There's a lot of hell stories here. Birds that came out on Sunday out of hell. Horse on fire rode on a Sunday. Sunday carried firewood, and you meet at the end the community of this early Irish saint. I believe this was the latest of the voyage tales, and there was definitely a lot more focus on hell, 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 hell. You did this bad, you did that bad, you're in hell, you're in hell, you're in hell. It was still entertaining, and it was cool seeing the building blocks that it got from the earlier Irish tales, right? The Voyage of Brendan, Maeldun, Bran, all of that together. So yeah. So I thought that was fine. The Voyage of Snegdus and Magrialga. This is about two clerics in the time of Columba. They go around visiting a few isles. There's nothing really special here. And it ends with a note about Ireland being occupied by evil, and only if they became more Christian and repented for their sins would the foreigners be driven out. I wonder if the authors were subtly talking about the English here. I don't know. That might be death of the author territory, but I might be willing to go out on a limb and say that, yeah, maybe that's what the author was referring to. And briefly, the tale of Skella and Cano. This is during the time of St. Columba and of Aedan of Dalriada. This is about this man who is exiled. His father was killed, and Aedan is not portrayed in a good light. He is portrayed as a cruel tyrant. But he travels around Ireland, he falls in love with the woman, and he has something that I have never seen in Irish mythological tales before. It's a life stone. Like, if the stone is destroyed, his soul is bound to it. I don't have the text in front of me, but it was something like the fairies had something to do with the stone or whatever, but that was kind of interesting. And then at the end, he and his lover, they die tragically, and yeah, there isn't a happy ending. And for this, I am going to have a link to this in the description. This is from Sidestone Press. It's completely free. The magazine is the early Neolithic of Northern Europe. This is about Newgrange. This is about the interior of the tomb. This is about the remains that they found, and they were in fact not dog remains, but in fact wolf remains. I'm just going over the highlighted sections I have. So they sought further radiocarbon dates on the bone from the tomb interior. Our first target has been the partial skeletons of 3 dogs, each recovered from just outside or close to each of the 3 tomb recesses. So as if they were buried right there at the little steps into the recesses. All of the samples range from 3300 to 3000 BC. This reveals that the 3 Newgrange canines are neither modern nor medieval in date, but instead were deposited at an earlier stage in the use of the passage tomb, broadly contemporary with the Petrus fragments, whatever. So far, the radiocarbon dates support O'Kelly's assertion that the tomb interior was sealed in early prehistory, though perhaps directly after the primary Neolithic phase of deposition. The results also raise exciting new possibilities about the role and status of animals in society in the 4th millennium BC in Ireland, potentially as non-human kin. Based on their exceptional size, it is possible that these canines may well be wolves. At Newgrange, they found the remains of 3 large dogs. These dogs could have been wolves. They were put there in Neolithic times. They were buried specifically, 1 at each of the 3 recesses. Okay, why does this matter? The tour guide at Newgrange, they said something about they found the remains of wolves in the tomb, and there was 1 buried at each recess, like they were buried there to protect the spirits of the dead or something like that. And I thought, that might be bullshit. But later I emailed them about it, and they were kind enough to send me, the name of this article. So I found the article, I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, well, I guess they weren't bullshitting. So I just thought it was really fucking cool. And not in a wow science Reddit bugman way, but it's like, that is interesting. That is cool. That is it for the text, boys. This went on much longer than I was anticipating. I'm sorry. I don't know if I'll do another Irish book video. If I do, it would be months later. I kind of want to get into some Standish O'Grady. Apparently he had a book about heroic history of Ireland. I cannot find a physical copy of this. I don't even know if there's a digital one. But I have a book I got from a university, which is a study of his work on Cuchulainne. So I have that to get into. I also have some other books coming. I kind of want to get into Revue Celtique. This was apparently a magazine. It was founded in France in 1870 and was about all things Celtic, so that sounds kind of cool. But Whitley Stokes, he's a big name. I want to read more of his stuff. Standish O'Grady, like I said. I'd love to get into the Annals of the Four Masters. I just wish there was a good physical copy for it. Because, yeah, I'll do digital, but I'm not happy about it. Sorry, I know this probably wasn't the most compelling video for everybody. But, yeah, if you like the Irish shit, hopefully I pointed you towards some books that might interest you. But that's going to be it from me. I was going to have another cultural drive-by on Light Lark. I finally got through with the books, but frankly, they're just bad and not in an entertaining bad. And there's an issue because I was able to get books 1 and 2 pretty quick from my library in fast succession. And then months went by before I got a copy of book 3. So what that meant was I'm pretty hazy on books 1 and 2, and I didn't have great notes on them. So I don't know. I feel like it would be a pretty weak episode, so I'm probably not doing that cultural drive-by. Instead, there will be a Not a Troth video. I'm hoping to have that one done in early November. I would like it to be the first week of November. I've already read the longest book in the little pile that I have, and it's not a ton of books this time. It's 6 books, but some of them are kind of short. So I read the longest one already. I'm halfway through another one, and the other ones I should be able to knock out fairly fast. I think that's a fairly realistic goal. I have other videos, usually book stuff and media reviews. You can check those out. I do have 2 books out right now about Irish mythology. It's dark fantasy. It's in 999 AD. Man named Dullahan with a talking head named Pig. They are put on a quest by a girl to find her father while there's this war going on. They fight monsters and such. There's some beautiful interior artwork, so you can check those out. They're free on my Substack, or you can buy them on Amazon. I've linked to that below. Anyways, thank you for listening. That's going to be it for me. Hopefully, new video within a month or so, but Whitepill Media out.